7:30.
Good job, thank you, great memos.
We can call this to order.
So I wasn't completely wrong on that reasonableness review, right?
Usual, yeah.
And the master plan consistency, I was gonna say, let's throw it in anyway, and you beat it to the punch, you did. He said, I know it's not necessary, but it's consistent anyway. Thank you.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to call the meeting to order, and our first step is to ask the secretary to call the roll.
Sure. Chairman Zucker,
Here.
Vice Chairwoman Balson Alvarez.
She'll be running late.
Oh, no, she was here.
Oh, she's...
She must have just stepped out.
Oh, did she step out? Okay, good.
Okay. Mr. Spur?
Here.
Mr. Felmet?
Here.
Councilmember Hamlet?
Here.
Mr. Dalmasso?
Here.
Ms. McGee? Mr. Formicelli?
Here.
Mr. Stern?
Here.
Mr. Bell is excused. Ms. Bowen?
Here.
You have a quorum. You may proceed.
All right, thank you. I'll read the public notice, and when Jennifer gets here, we'll do the pledge. In accordance with New Jersey Statute 10:4-10, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided to a newspaper of record and has been posted here in City Hall. Please be advised this is a no-smoking building. Fire exits are to my right, and your left, and in the back of the room. This is a scheduled meeting of the Planning Board. There may be other meetings currently running simultaneously with this meeting. If you're not here for the Summit Planning Board, your meeting may be upstairs or elsewhere in the building. And here she comes.
Went back for my water. That's cool.
Good, you're just in time. We'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise.
It's okay.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hey.
No problem.
One thing I noticed when I was watching one of the videos of our meeting is that our consultants and we all have to talk really close to these microphones to have it project.
Okay. Our first item on the agenda tonight is a Summit Community Program at Tacklock Field. And by way of introduction, I'm going to ask Mr. Warner to give us a couple minutes explaining why this project's come before us at this time.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Okay, there we go. This is not a typical application for the board, and it is what we refer to as a reasonableness review, and I'll briefly explain. It's not quite a capital project recommendatory review, because while it involves public property, and it certainly appears to be a public use, it is, and our city is exempt from zoning. It is not a capital project because it is a donation from a nonprofit corporation that is providing the funds for this project. So it's not technically a capital project. However, as I said, public property, public use certainly appears to be, and so there is an exemption from general exemption from zoning. But it's also not a site plan application per se because of the exemption from zoning. So there are some cases, including the Hills of Troy case, where essentially what the job of the board is to do a reasonableness review. There's a 4-part balancing test to ensure that it is indeed a public purpose and therefore exempt from zoning. And that 4-part test is the reasons why the municipality, or in this case, well, the municipality and the not-for-profit enterprise are joining together in essence to do this project, the type of public interest to be served by the location in the project, the nature of the entity, the private entity, and the weighing the same to ensure that the private benefits obtained warrant an exemption from zoning on this project. So it's literally based on a couple of cases, including the Hills of Troy case. I guess the best way I could describe it, and it's not a great way, is somewhere in between it's capital project-like, but not quite capital project. So it's a
Because it's on-
recommendatory review. We are not finding that whether or not there's a site plan approval required, there's no site plan approval required. We can make recommendations, and certainly our board professionals and agencies have given us some recommendations to consider. And we can, while we don't have to, we can make a master plan consistency determination, no harm done, and Mr. Burgess referenced that fact in his report. He said that while not technically required, he found the purposes to be such that they are consistent with the master plan. So that's our job this evening with respect to this project.
So in sum, we can make recommendations this evening, and we can opt to find it consistent with, or not inconsistent with the master plan.
Yes, correct. And again, presumably, I don't want to presume too much, but I suspect that the board will find that it is a public purpose and it meets that four-part test under the Hills of Troy case. And I'm happy to repeat that test at the appropriate time later on, so that indeed there is a reasonable exemption from zoning requirements.
Ms. Hapler?
A couple of questions, Mr. Warner. One, what are the public hearing requirements for this public notice what are the public notice requirements?
Yeah, no public, well, when I say no public notice, no MLUL notice required by the applicant Summit Community Programs.
Okay.
We didn't, doesn't require MLUL notice vis-à-vis publication in the newspaper and certified mail personal notice
Okay.
to those within 200 feet.
And I guess the only other question is, it sounds like this is going to be the first reasonableness review in the history of Summit, New Jersey. So for me, it just sort of stuck out. I'm like, I'm calling Joe before the meeting, I'm calling Jennifer, and
Oh, you could have
so
called
this
them.
is, but, I mean, this is the first time there's ever, and
Yeah.
I'm just curious, so this isn't a Board of Ed project, it's on city land. So can we just, because for us, nobody knows what the Hills of Troy is here, right? So, when we show up, and I guess that's where we're all just sort of like,
What's this guy?
what's this? Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to explain it briefly, and I'm happy to continue to explain it. Joe may want to chime in as well. It's not the first in the history of the state of New Jersey for any municipality, I can assure you that. And I represent several boards and have for many years, decades now, and had a few. But they are not garden variety by any stretch. And oftentimes they will involve sort of a joint enterprise between a private entity and a public entity or municipality. This, again, isn't even exactly on point with the Hills of Troy case, but it's pretty darn close. So that's why it was the most appropriate review for the board. Again, not a capital project, because it's not municipal funds.
Right.
Capital funds being utilized, so it doesn't fall squarely or within that category. And you're familiar with the recommendatory reviews we've done for Board of Ed projects and other capital projects. Not a site plan, because it's a public purpose and a public use, as I'm sure we'll hear. So the closest thing, and it's fairly close, is Hills of Troy and its progeny. There's other cases that are under that line of cases.
So do the requirements from the technical review committee change versus with a courtesy review and a reasonableness review? Because a lot of the things that I'm seeing in here tonight are requiring the applicant, which is the city and the reviewer, but you have a nonprofit who's unaware of those requirements. And that's where I'm very confused.
Yeah. Well, I didn't do the reports. So I think those reports technically should be viewed as, for the board to make a determination as to whether or not to impose or, you know, those as, or make those as recommendations.
But
And-
shouldn't the, I mean, if I may, shouldn't the technical review committee say you either have to go forward with a permit based on the stormwater management requirements? That shouldn't be for this board to decide. It's not our decision. It's the city of Summit, the technical review committee should be saying, these are your stormwater management requirements. Why should we talk about that? So I'm just very confused.
Yeah, well, I think similar to if these were reports for a site plan application, in which case you would be looking at them and saying, these are your conditions of approval. Here, these are your recommendations in the way that we handle courtesy reviews for capital projects. Again, this not being fitting squarely within that category.
Mr. Feldman, did you have a question?
Delia covered most of it, but so who decides that this comes to this board if it's once in a summit? Like, I'm sure we've had public-private funded structures in this community before. So like, how did this
Parkline.
get on today's agenda? And how come nobody sent out like the 4 things that go into the case and all that preliminary stuff? Because that would have been very helpful to have before this second.
Well, I was asked how this should be handled. I opine based on my knowledge and experience with similar cases, including the Hills, well, I didn't handle the Hills of Troy case, it's a published decision. And from there, the process continued. I wasn't candidly consulted again until all the reports came in and I was provided with them. So.
And I think a lot of the comments, if I may, are from the city engineer. And I know we have some assistants here, but the city engineer is not here.
Yes, actually, we have the assistant city engineer here. I'm sorry, Mr. Salama.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
so
sorry,
you-
also, you should be sitting over here. I
Yes.
just-
Okay, that's
I'm
helpful, sorry.
apologizing.
Mr.
Yeah.
Slum, I didn't know that. So you'll be able to answer anything related to Director Schrager's comments?
Yes.
Okay, great.
My superior gave me authority to discuss it.
Excellent.
Yeah, and if you could please sit here. I candidly expected an engineer to be here.
Yes, my apologies, my apologies for
The
not,
expectation was correct.
Before we go forward,
Thank you.
I was wondering, Mr. Burgess, can you fill in any gaps here in terms of what is expected of this board in terms of how we're supposed to respond, or I should say, how we're supposed to evaluate?
Is it similar to like when the Board of Ed came for the high school and the middle school,
Yeah.
where we can offer suggestions, but they're under no obligation to actually, it can go in one ear and out the other and do nothing?
Well, I don't know if I'd say one ear and out the other, but yes, it is recommendatory as opposed to a statute. You can statutorily or actually with jurisdiction of the board impose the conditions. It is recommendatory. It's, as I said before, it's similar to the way we handle courtesy
Seems like it's an
reviews.
even lower bar.
It does, exactly. So.
I don't know if it's I wouldn't candidly describe it as a lower bar. I'd describe it as a similar process. And again, the reasonableness test is really derived around, is it primarily a public use? And the reason that test was enunciated in the Hills of Troy case and other cases was because you had this, in those cases, this sort of combination. Private, public, is it private, which is it more, that type of thing. So here.
Do we have to opine if those 4 prongs are met?
You consider these, they don't have to meet it's a balancing test. So these are the considerations. Why is the municipality entering into a partnership with a private enterprise? Here it's, well, it is what it is. You'll hear it's a nonprofit and they're putting up the funds for the project. We have 2 resolutions from the governing body, appropriately so in my opinion. I serve as municipal council in municipalities as well. Accepting the donation is one, as I recall, and the other authorizing the use of the public municipal land, a portion thereof. So this is not, well, that's one of the factors. The other, the type of public interest to be served. The other, the nature of the private enterprise. And the other, weighing the private and public benefits and determining if it's reasonable for exemption from zoning regulations. I suspect from what I've heard and seen, we may hear that this is very public and not particularly private, and maybe the bulk of the private aspect of it is that the city doesn't have to pay for it. But we'll hear that.
Well, I think that, if I may, Chairman, that sort of is the question. So this is privately funded. However, if we impose these stormwater management requirements, which I don't believe the 501c3 was aware of until 2 days ago, then does the city take on that responsibility? Because when I look at reasonableness all over the internet and you talk about stormwater, who's responsible for the damage if we don't insert or prove or put forward those, who's in charge of that?
Well, it's municipal property, and while the municipality, the city here, is exempt from zoning, ultimately, I would suspect that someone will ensure that the appropriate stormwater management is installed.
Just to chime in for a moment, stormwater management would be taken care of through the city's engineering division. If there are any issues, recommendations that would come up through that, it would, pertain to this board to provide the recommendation, but it would be the engineering division to oversee the project, because it is on public land.
Right. So I wouldn't anticipate, well, again, I think we heard it. It's, it would be recommendatory as perhaps as to the not-for-profit entity that is funding the installation of these facilities, but that certainly doesn't preclude the city from taking on those obligations.
But fundamentally, we're saying.
It may,
I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
No, it may be most appropriate to have the applicant
Yeah.
provide this testimony, address those 4 points, also address my comments about the consistency with the master plan, and in that way, I think you'll be touching base with all the requirements that you're obligated to address.
Well, let's have the applicant present their case.
All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Chairman Zucker and members of the Planning Board for allowing myself, Mark Ozorowski, I'm the Director of Community Programs. I've been with the city for almost 26 years. I've got 2 of the 3-headed monsters with me, Chris Badgley, Leo Patus, Bobby Moriarty, who couldn't make it this evening. They are the 3 gentlemen who came up with the idea, became a committee, and then turned themselves into an LLC in order to raise funds for this project. In your package, you saw my memo that I sent to everybody, but basically, we've been talking about this lacrosse wall for at least 20 years. In 2014, we did a redevelopment plan at Tatlock. Within that redevelopment plan, we had a lacrosse wall. Then in 2020, 2021, the lacrosse group had come to me and said, hey, Mark, it's time. We need to do this. I met with my council board, or my council committee. I met with my DCP advisory board. We discussed this project. At that point, both committees said it's a fantastic idea, Mark, but we do not want to put money into this project. I reached out to the lacrosse club, the Summit High School athletic director, these gentlemen, Bobby Moriarty, and they said, hey, Mark, we will take on the responsibility to fundraise for this project. We will hire an architect as well as a contractor. We just need official use of the city land. So back in 2021, or I guess it was March of 2022, these gentlemen came to the council, presented their idea. At that point in time, the council said, we are in favor, passed a resolution, but did say, once you raise the funds, hire an architect and bring in your contractor, come back to us and let us know that. In February of 2024, they came back. They said they had raised the funds for the project. They named the architect as well as the contractor. The council said, We are in total agreement. We are super happy. We would like you to go to the planning board for a courtesy review, and that's why we're here today. As far as, again, the four items, I
Well,
think.
Actually, before you do that, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to, even though it is not a site plan application, I'm going to swear you in and swear in the two witnesses, the other two witnesses as well, just out of an abundance of caution. So if you could just raise your right hand, do you, all three of you, do you swear to God or affirm that the testimony you've already given and that which you will no doubt continue to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Thank you. But please, continue.
So that's where we are at this point. As far as, I had heard whether it's going to be used, it's going to be private or public, it's going to be open for every single resident in the city. Whether it's, yes, it's a lacrosse wall, something that we should have had, but any sport can use it, soccer, tennis, you name it. It's going to be open for everybody. It's not going to be restricted to one organization or one group. I guess I can open up to questions. Either myself or Leo or Chris can answer. Yes.
What's a lacrosse wall?
Leo, you want to?
It's basically a backstop.
And I'm sorry, if you could just give us again your name and your position with the
Davis,
entity.
164 Beechwood Road, South New Jersey.
But you have to get the mic, so everybody,
Yeah, we're gonna have to, a little bit formal.
You can use the handheld
just nobody
mic.
will hear you.
You could just turn it on, just switch the button on.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Page.
Paytas, P-A-Y-T-A-S,
and-
class of
and-
81.
And you are with?
I am with the Summit Lacrosse Association.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm Chris Badgley, also a Summit resident, and also with the lacrosse community.
Okay, I'm sorry, please continue.
It's basically a backstop.
Like a net or a wall?
A backstop, so it's a concrete cinder block wall with a asphalt on the surface, on the ground, for just wall ball, what we call it. It's just throwing and catching against the wall. Nothing better to develop skills, left hand, right hand, throwing the ball with a wall that doesn't miss. So it's just back and forth on that.
Yeah, one side's going to be a playing surface for catching and throwing, and the other side is going to be a covered area, a gazebo that will look out over the field below. So it's dual, or it's one's catch and throw and one's place for shelter, essentially.
Is there any lighting?
Only under the gazebo, just to safety lighting. There will be no lights behind the wall.
So just downlighting.
Downlighting.
Yeah.
Yeah, just for the covered area, not on the throwing side.
Through you, Chair. So a couple of questions. One is, will we have a sign that says children can't use this past a certain hour? Number two, while I don't mind you saying it's for soccer and lacrosse, when I have a fourth grader, and what I'm thinking in my mind is you've got a sixth grader throwing a lacrosse ball, and you've got a third grader playing lacrosse, and the third grader is going to get whacked in the head by a lacrosse ball. So have we thought about, I know it's probably the intention is good to have it used by multi-sports, but my fear is that if a couple lacrosse kids are using it, a couple soccer kids are going to lose out unless somebody's really getting a bad soccer ball back. So who's managing that, I guess, is my question.
So there's not any general management in place for the wall. I think if you look at and you observe a tennis backboard for that matter,
Yeah.
you have the same type of, who's ever on the wall at that particular moment in time is going to be on the wall. So if no one's there and, third graders show up and they're on the wall, well, they're on it until they're off, and then the sixth graders come on. So it's going to be, I'm not suggesting that we try to police it and say, okay, between this hour, this group can use it, and that hour somebody else can use it. That's not the intent.
Just a quick note on that. Over at Memorial Field, we have a wall that's used for tennis, and there's soccer players that go up there. There's all kinds of different athletes that go up there. We never get any complaints or fights or anything, so.
Whose job is it to maintain the wall on an ongoing basis? like
The
throughout
Summer
time?
Lacrosse Club has taken on that responsibility.
Are there any time constraints other than light? Like it's a lacrosse ball going against the concrete wall, right? Makes a noise if it's at night, just thinking about the residents that are near the field. Is there any?
I don't think it's any louder than a pickleball. You've heard that
Yes.
for hours, right? But a lacrosse ball is actually quieter than a pickleball. And since there's no light, it would not be utilized after dark.
I mean, if I may, then I think we should put some rules in place, because I've seen communities just go wild over pickleball, and I think if we could be proactive and just recommend a stop time, if they're not going to use it anyway, then it would allow our police department to enforce a certain time and put rules in place, and I'm mentioning that we should do that for the park line anyway, so I think to your point, it might be helpful to just be proactive and recommend that.
Do you want to recommend till dark?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's fine.
Which is what you-
Yeah.
Yeah, that's safe.
And then I know there's a bigger Tatlock plan, so to speak, that I saw some schematics about it. Does this fit in with that? Is
So part of the
there a
reason.
reason that's being done?
Well, part of the reason we chose this location, I had met with the lacrosse president, I had met with Dan Healy, the athletic director, a few council members and I went down there. And basically, this location allows for the current use of that facility and not interfere, as well as potential expansion with potentially the field house. So this is the best and really only location that we could put it in.
Do we have any other questions from the board?
Have the residents closest to this construction been told about this?
I don't think there's a requirement, but
But,
Yeah.
I mean, if I may, I can say we approved this at council in, was it March or April, Mark?
It was in March.
Yeah, and I will say there is a Scribner error in your memo, Mark. Stephanie, it says in Mark's memo dated October 15th, it says in March of 2002, but that was 2022.
Yes.
Yes.
So the council has unanimously approved this on multiple occasions, I believe. We'd have to get the dates from Stephanie, but most recently, we did the
February 2024.
February, so,
when they-
and,
when they
right,
came in.
so residents came, I can't remember if they came to that meeting or not. I
They
think
did.
they did.
Yes,
Yes,
they
they
did.
did.
Yes.
Yes, they did.
Several questions were
Yes,
asked.
several questions were asked and answered.
I got another question. When is construction planned to start? If this,
The goal is to hopefully have it in by the spring when lacrosse starts. Obviously, once we follow the rules with the city and the engineering department, we're looking to start as soon as possible.
and will any of the other Tatlock area be affected during the construction of this, or will it be done during all hours? Will there be, what kind of equipment will be used, things like that?
I'm not sure of the specifics, but it won't interfere with any activities that are going on in the park.
there's nothing used there now currently, right?
No.
The city engineer mentioned stormwater management and a management plan for the impervious cover, I guess, that's going in there. So I was wondering, because I don't know if you've done anything with regard to that yet, but whether we could just recommend that this is adhered to, so that we don't have any stormwater management issues. And then the construction office also had some recommendations and some questions. Apparently on the drawings, it's poured concrete with rebar maybe, and then on the, somewhere else it says it's cinder block. So just cleaning that up, and we can probably just recommend to work with the construction office to satisfy their needs and their questions for code compliance.
Well, I was going to draw attention to the zoning officer's comments about the fence and the lighting and providing testimony in answer to those comments. Is that what you were going to raise, Joe?
That's exactly where I was going, so you beat me to the punch.
Okay. Applicant should provide testimony as to the finalized fence height, the pavilion lighting plan, where the power source would be, ongoing maintenance you've already commented on, and any signage.
I think we're recommending a sign
And
that
the height of
says
the
that, you know,
So
open
the height
till
of the fence
dark.
is going to be consistent with the black fence that's up there. It's going to be 6 foot. And then if you're familiar with the area, the ticket booth, there's a power source. There's actually an outlet right there as well as electricity inside the ticket booth. So that's where we'll be pulling power from.
And any signage on the wall other than what we've already recommended, which is, no use after dark?
The logo that's there, the Summit logo that's on it, the S, which I think is on your plans. I think you've seen that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please. Yes, please.
My question would be, when was I guess it wouldn't be the applicant, because that's us, but the entity that's paying for this, when were they made aware of the stormwater management requirements?
Thursday, this past Thursday.
So today's,
The
Monday?
21st, I guess.
Today's
so
Monday.
so 3 days ago?
Yes.
Okay. So is the nonprofit comfortable with this memo from Department of Community Services that he writes that you're going to have to be in compliance with these DRO stormwater management regulations?
We were just speaking with the assistant engineer, and it would appear that understanding that code, what we just got a few minutes ago, seems to be relatively simple, in a sense that it's an aggregate zone to take care of, and it's a small area, 300 square feet of an impervious matter that we're dealing with. So the stormwater management of that system shouldn't be that big of an undertaking for us to accommodate it. So we should be able, we're gonna have, a backhoe that's gonna be digging footers anyway for the wall. So obviously, we need to kind of understand it a little better, but we will be in accordance with the regulations that are required.
Great.
Is the plan, just on the stormwater, is the intent to submit a stormwater management plan for review and approval by the city's engineer? Just as you're all kind of coming up to speed on it. Is that the intent?
I think the intent is to revise the plans accordingly, and we submit for permit, and at that point, it'll be included on the plan for the permit to go ahead with the
So
construction.
it won't be an afterthought, it'll be something that's planned with the architect, the engineers, subject to review and approval by the city before any construction is done.
Correct.
Okay.
And can you describe the materials being used?
Brick, cinder block, asphalt, wood,
Wood.
shingles.
And concrete.
Right. I mean, from the design, the images we saw, I mean, it seems attractive in terms of the pavilion look. And I guess a wall is a wall.
Yeah.
It's going to be a beautiful wall.
There you go. Beautiful wall. Well, we're concerned with everything being somewhat consistent with our design guidelines that we tried to.
No, it's going to fit right into the neighborhood. Both my children went to Washington School in that neighborhood, and we looked at that
Yep.
building, so it would be brick in nature and columns and nice roof, so it would fit into the neighborhood also.
Good.
That's exactly what we like.
That's what we like. Yeah.
It's my neighborhood.
If I can make one more comment, one of the things that we talked about at council, and this is the last comment I'll make, was thank you, first of all, for this vision, and it's our job to make sure that we've taken care of the neighbors and everything. The one thing I love about this, that it allows lacrosse from all income levels, so you don't have to hire a private coach. It's truly a practice area for everybody in Summit. It's not just the kids who can afford a private coach, and that's why I think that, a lot of us are gonna be able to get behind this project. So thank you for your vision and your leadership in this
Thank you.
project.
Thank you.
I think one of the things, just to add on to what you're saying, like, if you're down there and you look at the amount of use that gets on a weekend in the spring, the amount of kids that are down there playing, if you were to walk around the area, there really is no safe spot in which to throw a ball against a wall. And if those of you guys who are familiar with lacrosse, wall ball is a big thing. That's how we get our quality players to kind of get to the high school.
Yeah.
Just one quick question. We were just looking at the images here. At the back side of it, that you said that was covered, what is, that's just to put stuff under, or what's that going to be used for? What's the
It'll be
intent?
more of a gazebo as a place of shelter, place to look out over the field below. So more of a, instead of just having a wall on each side, we thought we'd use one side just as a viewing area, place of shelter if it's raining, if there's thunderstorm, lightning, place people could go.
Are we, yeah, okay. Are we concerned that there could be anyone trying to play wall ball on that side since it's a wall? Should we add that to the sign?
No, 'cause it's gonna have columns, and it's only, I think, 7 feet deep, and it'll be more of a covered structure on that side.
And there won't be a hard surface in front of it beyond the porch area, so
Okay.
that it's not gonna be conducive to throwing it against the wall.
Yeah, and then that side of it facing the field, that's a few more feet down, it starts to slope downhill a little bit after that anyway, so it wouldn't be good to throw on that side.
Thank you.
Just have one last question. Have you guys made a decision whether it's going to be pavement or athletic turf?
Pavement. True or bounce?
For the entire fenced-in area, or for like, just the area approaching the wall?
Just on the throwing side, I believe it's,
Is that the backside of it?
Backside of
Yeah.
it.
I believe it's, I think it's like 45 feet
What I'm
square.
saying is like this whole fenced-in area, is the whole thing paved, or is it just like, a number of 10 feet leading up to the wall? Or something?
No, the whole place would be
Yeah, the whole,
paved.
yeah, the whole
So pavement is a
fenced-in
truer
area.
bounce than like the surface that they'd be playing on the field?
So if you understand what you're trying to do, if you've got a turf in there, the turf's gonna give, so the ball's not gonna bounce up true. So you wanna be able to catch and throw with a consistent bounce instead of like bringing the ball back up to where you can catch it. So you're throwing it, bounce, catch, throwing it, bounce, catch. If it's hitting a softer turf, it'll die,
less
and now
consistent.
you're catching it down here.
Got it.
So it's more accurate for.
You get a truer bounce. Hey, we're gonna play tennis against it also, same idea.
We can't really condition that.
So just to clarify, the fenced-in area is how many square feet?
3,600 feet, all right, 60 by 60?
I think we made it smaller.
Smaller
If I
than
may
that.
speak to that. The square footage of the fenced-in area, approximately 1788 square feet.
All right.
Is that?
Which one of our stipulations as part of the city engineer's office was to include the coverage tables on the plan so that all of these values are broken down clearly on the plan.
But going off of the fence in this particular area, if it was the entire area, it would be 3,600 feet. So that should just be.
Noted,
Okay.
noted.
So it's not the, so between the asphalt and the actual fence, there'll be, since we're not talking about half that much is actually covered. Is the rest grass? What goes around, or is it permeable? Inside the fence?
So I think our goal is to have the entire space inside the fence. I think the plan may be incorrect, and we probably shrink that down to the 1,700 square feet.
Oh, so the 300.
Oh, okay, so it's not really 60 by 60 or whatever.
Just the building?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think originally it was
Pergola?
60 feet, and I think we reduced it down to 45 feet. Yeah, so maybe that's an earlier drawing might have.
For like 2,000.
Yes, close
Yes.
to that number. 1788
Impervious
is
cover.
the area within the fence. The 300 number is solely the gazebo.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah. So,
But even a 60 by 45 foot space, I'm hearing everybody, still 2,700 square feet of paved space. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page with the size of this thing.
Yeah, I think it's 45 feet length in the wall, and then I don't know how far the fence was going back. Was that like,
Is it almost 60 feet long?
I think that was too big. I think we reduced it to 45.
I thought I saw 60 throughout the.
Yeah, originally, I think that was the idea. Yeah, it's big. That was too big.
What do you have, 2,000?
Yeah, so I have about 2,000. That was estimated from the plan at scale, just using an engineer scale, just measured length, width, multiplied, that's it. However, I mean, that should be confirmed with you guys and with the lot coverage table on top of it, on the plan. So the contractor, you folks, the reviewing party, we're all on the same page on the size of this thing.
Yep.
So, yes.
And the mitigation for the stormwater, if any,
Yes.
that's
So
required.
it's all, however much impervious that's gonna be added, all is subject to
And
the
then
ordinance.
for them to get
Yes.
their building permit, that's all just gonna have to get buttoned up, right?
After this recommendation, as a part of the permit, because of the coverage and impervious coverage, it would naturally go to the engineering division as a as a permit for their review, and all these conditions would then be applied upon completion, then reviewed, et cetera.
And then
Yes.
the construction office for these other.
Yes, absolutely.
We will be handling this as a review, just like any other reviews. So it'll go through the grading permit application process.
Sounds good.
All right, then. So, Delia, we okay?
And then I guess the last thing is steep slopes. Doesn't look like we've addressed that, but you'll address that at your,
So it seems to be out of the range of steep slopes in the area, and given the scope of work, the reviewing party finds it acceptable that it's
It's not really
out of the
stupid.
zone, yeah.
I spoke with Director Schrager today, and one of the questions I asked is, well, why did this get targeted as a floodplain in SDL? And he mentioned that it was, I guess it came up as a floodplain because of Martinsbrook Park, but that we have not seen that type of flood erosion. I'm not sure, Mark, if you can say that, but he said it has not, we haven't seen it, so I asked the question, that was the answer. Can you talk about that? Is there any flooding down there?
During Sandy.
No.
it was under, so,
Okay.
Well, there you go, that's helpful, that's actually.
But
really helpful.
other than that, probably not.
Okay, sorry.
Right, Delia, I haven't seen any, yeah. anything.
So with that, our recommendations are, what I gather was the signage. Does anyone else have anything else? I think they've covered every point.
I mean, I would say, I know this sounds ridiculous, but add dogs to the signage, because we're adding them at Tatlock Turf, and like, let's just knock it out. If we're making a sign, let's just say no dogs allowed.
Yeah, because I mean, that is the, like, I live over there, and there is like a little group of people who, their dogs run up and down that.
You had asked me that
Oh.
question.
I could just
Aren't there
imagine the
no dogs
lacrosse
allowed
balls
in that
going in the
fenced-in
dog.
area?
Not to mention the cleanup.
Well, they're there all the time,
And there are some.
yeah.
Okay, all right, we're adding
I do
dogs to
not.
the
I
signage.
obey the sign.
Before we conclude, if we're getting to that conclusion point, Mr. Chairman, if I may, there's just two things. One, again, Mr. Burgess in his memorandum opined as to the consistency or lack of inconsistency with respect to the master plan, which, while not required, I would concur with him. I would recommend that we make that finding in our decision. That will be memorialized in a resolution to be adopted at the next meeting. That's one item. The other item is, if now's the appropriate time, I can reiterate that four-part test for the board to make its reasonableness determination, or I can wait. I just didn't want you to finish before I got there.
Yeah. I mean, what's that? I'm sorry.
Joe, do you have anything to share?
The only thing, and Steve touched upon it, there are a number of goals and objectives in the master plan that talk about enhancing recreation facilities in the community and upgrading community resources, particularly recreation facilities. So this ties in directly with that goal.
Right, that's how we looked at it.
Thank you.
So I'm sorry.
So, go ahead.
With respect to the Hills of Troy, the
Hills of Troy.
It's almost biblical in its sound, but that case involved a cell tower to be constructed on municipal property, the Parsippany's Police Station, and the issue was whether or not it was exempt from zoning, because the wireless cell service provider, that cell tower was going to serve the municipality in many ways, police department, emergency communications, et cetera, but it did involve a private wireless cell tower service provider, and the court ultimately employed this four-part test and determined that indeed it was a public use primarily and exempt from zoning. So again, that test is the public purpose analysis requires, one, the reasons why the municipality entered into the agreement with the private enterprise, two, the type of public interest to be served thereby at the location, three, the nature of the private enterprise, which you've heard, you're familiar with the program, and fourth, weighing the same against the private benefits obtained to conclude whether the private enterprise also is exempt from zoning regulation on a municipal project, and where on such analysis the public interest outweighs the private interest, then the private entity may also share in the municipality's zoning exemption. Municipalities always have the power to contract with private enterprises on municipal projects, and as long as those agreements are for an overriding public purpose, zoning exemptions exercised reasonably should apply to the private company. So that is the context of that reasonableness review. That is that four-part test which you'll be opining on.
Thank you. And I think we heard testimony tonight that the public purpose does outweigh any private potential benefit to the organization, which itself is a public service organization. So, does anyone have any other thoughts, or should we, what do we do in terms of finalizing our recommendation?
It would, well, it would be that reasonableness finding. It would be a motion, second, and a roll call vote with that reasonableness finding, that consistency with the master plan finding, and then I can.
The
run through
recommendation.
What I have is the recommendations of approval,
Right.
which include most, frankly, of the items in the staff comments reports without going through all those separately and independently. But in addition there too, we have a sign which would include the time restrictions. I guess it's in essence no use between from dusk to dawn, is that while it start? As well as, I believe I heard we're gonna have a no dogs allowed on the sign as well. Bear with me. The stormwater management actually is in one of the reports, but it will be complied with subject to the review and approval of our engineering department. And obviously, everything will be code compliant, working with the construction office. And that remained, actually, I don't know that I had anything else that was not covered in the actual reports and comments of the staff memos.
Does anybody have any other?
Any other comments?
Just with respect to the signage, we just expand that to allow maybe Mark and his team some latitude around other stipulations on the signage. I assume that's not the only two things we'll want to mention: no alcoholic beverages, no glass. I can imagine there's all kinds of other things. I don't know.
Yeah, we have a list of items that we put on our signs. The one thing I did want to mention, though, I don't want to have dusk to dawn, because dawn in the summertime sometimes is, 5:30 in the morning, and we don't want people playing lacrosse. So we'll figure out the best time from a sound, from an ordinance for sound or whatever, from the town.
Okay. Yeah, the noise ordinances are usually based on DEP's NJAC 7:29 at SEC, right? And I'm trying to remember what those time frames are. Any chance I get, I'll do
I
that.
think it's,
Yeah, but there are times in there, if those.
Whatever
were-
the code is for the city, we'll follow.
Okay, thank you.
And then Steve, with regard to maintenance of the pavilion, was it already through the agreements with the governing body that that arrangement was stipulated and agreed to, that ongoing financing would be provided through this LLC or its successor entities to provide for maintenance of the facility?
That's right,
Candidly,
that was
all I was provided was with the two resolutions, so it didn't get into
Or
that type
ideally,
of
if you
detail.
remember anything.
I'm sorry.
Do you remember if it was stipulated somewhere, the mechanism for ongoing financial support? Not that we can compel that, but it's a recommendation.
Yeah, I would assume it's some MOU somewhere, no?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, Leo, we agreed upon it now.
Yeah,
So
the Summit Lacrosse Club is, ongoing maintenance for the wall.
Which they already said.
It's just a recommendation.
Yeah, and I don't remember if we discussed it prior.
You've been
At prior
sworn in,
meetings.
so.
And not that there's a whole lot of maintenance that needs to be done, it's a,
Yeah. Eventually, the asphalt will crack, right? Eventually, there'll be some inspections done. It should be relatively de minimis, but it'd be great to see.
So it's appropriate for a recommendation in the approval to reference ongoing maintenance, the obligation of the Summit Lacrosse Club?
That's correct, yeah.
That they testified to that, that they, yeah.
Right, I assume that
Thank you
that
very
gazebo
much.
will require roofing repairs, lighting repairs over time, things like that.
It's very nice.
All right, with that in mind, do we have a motion?
So moved?
A second?
Second?
Thank you, Mr. Stern.
Vice Chairwoman Bolson Alvarez,
Yes.
Mr. Spur,
Yes.
Mr. Felmett,
Yes.
Councilmember Hamlet,
Yes.
Mr. Del Masso,
Yes.
Ms. McGee,
Yes.
Mr. Formicelli,
Yes.
Mr. Stern,
Yes.
Chairman Zucker.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for this welcome addition to Tatlock.
Thanks so much, guys. He said there's case law that is, based on city, it's not city-funded project, so that's your conundrum.
All right, moving right along. We have two discussions on our, updates and discussions on the agenda for tonight. Mr. Burgess drafted a memo helping us think through our challenges with regard to how we address the requirements for reviewing our master plan.
Yes. I assume everybody has read that. There's going to be a written quiz, so be prepared. At our last meeting, we discussed three different options. You know, we talked about, can we simply update the re-examination report from 2016 and turn it into a master plan? Alternatively, do we prepare a new re-examination report? Or third, do we just start with the comprehensive new master plan? In the end, we came to the conclusion that you would be best served by simply preparing what I'll call, for a technical term, a down and dirty re-examination report. We could do that
That's a
quickly.
planning term, not a legal term.
Yes. In 2025, we are going to be incredibly busy with the Housing Element and Fair Share Plan. We will only have until the end of January to assist the governing body in determining whether or not we're going to accept the number, the housing need number that DCA published, I guess, a week and a half ago. And we're going to talk, I want to talk about that in a moment.
Please, yeah.
Or do we want to accept that, or do we want to challenge it and offer it an alternative number? And then by the end of June, we must adopt the new Housing Element and Fair Share Plan. For those that went through the process last time around, you know, it's an exhaustive process. There's a lot of time and effort that went into it, and there are innumerable meetings as we not only discuss all the background information, but then selecting sites to address whatever our obligation will be. And I say whatever our obligation will be because DCA had indicated that we have a rehabilitation obligation of 59 units and a prospective obligation, future obligation of 345 units. And those are the numbers that the legislation asks that we, or the governing body, adopt a resolution on as to whether or not they're accepting it or not. In prior rounds, we had obtained a vacant land adjustment. We will certainly be entitled to a vacant land adjustment again. I will tell you that the DCA was obligated in the legislation to follow what's called the Jacobson methodology. Judge Jacobson, back in 2018 and 19? 2017 and 18, ran a 41-day trial just to determine what's the appropriate formula for determining how our state's housing obligation is distributed. Irrespective of what DCA determines using that methodology. The legislation also says that if a municipality is going to challenge the number, the municipality has to use the exact same methodology. So given that fact,
Thanks.
and given the fact that so much of it is census data driven, there's not that much chance that we're going to adjust our number in any significant way. But we're critically, it's a very long and expensive process to run that formula. We would not do it. We would suggest a couple of statisticians that would do that for you. But I can tell you, since we've printed some, but not all of the documents, there's the document itself that DCA has put together, and then there's about 11 indices that they've also put together that total in excess of 3,000 pages. Now, that's for every municipality in the state, but it just goes to show you the weight of the documentation that we'd have to, or somebody would have to review. We're entitled to a vacant land adjustment. We will be entitled. So why go to that time, money, and expense for something that we know we're not going to have to worry about in the end?
Joe, for the sake of argument, when would we know about the vacant land adjustment? When would that number come in?
That doesn't get even established until well into 2025, after January. They're only asking, are you accepting the number?
First you have to accept, and then you can talk about
Right.
reality.
What we would suggest is we start that soon, but there's two numbers that you really need to think about. There's not only that 345 figure and how it will get adjusted, and the vacant land adjustment process will be similar to what we did the last time around. However, what's interesting is the legislation, there are so many holes in it that leave a lot of interpretation. There are two schools of thought in terms of how you get to your vacant land number. One school of thought that I subscribe to is you have to look at all the vacant land that's been created since the last certification of your housing plan. You don't double count. If a vacant site that you identified in the third round plan, you don't count that again in the fourth round plan, because then that site would be double counted for you. There was a New Jersey APA Professional Planners Conference on this issue, and there was one person on that panel that subscribed to the belief that you start all over. And a lot of people chuckled at that, but nobody just stood up and said, that's ridiculous, which was unfortunate. I wasn't there, so I couldn't do that. I was actually in court on another affordable housing matter that day. But I think that, and most of us believe that you don't start from scratch. You start from the end of the third round. And if, say, a building has been knocked down, now that's a newly vacant site. If you also have to look at sites that may have redevelopment potential that weren't looked at in the third round. I know somebody, you had mentioned Parsippany. We're the planners in Parsippany, and they built.
Troy Hills.
Right.
Hence the Hills of Troy, in case anybody was wondering.
Yeah.
The Hills of Troy Neighborhood Association versus Parsippany Troy. I'm sorry, yes.
As you may know, they had a tremendous number of substantial office developments in the 80s and 90s. And then every owner of those buildings came forward in that third round to say, we'll knock down our buildings because they're 80% vacant. And some gorgeous looking office buildings are now being knocked down to make way for affordable housing. So if you had something like that, we would have to look at that. But we don't start from scratch. And last time around, for those new board members, we had calculated that our RDP, our realistic development potential, which flows out of the vacant land adjustment analysis, was only 36 units. So I would suggest that in all likelihood, our number is going to be much less than that. But in addition to that, prospective need number is that rehab need number of 59. Now, I'm going to round it up to 60 to make the math easier. You're obligated to set aside, to address a third of that number right up front in terms of financing rehabilitation. And right now, the regs talk about $20,000 per unit. Used to be 10, but now everybody's talking about $20,000 per unit. So 20,000, a third of that number, 20 units, that's not spare change for you. So we want to look at and do a windshield survey, which the regulations have provided in the past and presumably they'll provide again, and drive the town to look at, what our actual number should be. We've been very successful in other municipalities, and I think we did it here, by reducing what the rehab number that was published ended up being. I think I told Delia or somebody in the town I live in, under the third round, we had a 4-unit rehab number. And then with this fourth round, they say we have a 78-unit rehab number. Drive around town, nothing has changed, but all of a sudden, that number, in one other town that we represent, we already had the same situation. It went from 21 to 156. So we want to look at this number because we feel that if they've made such glaring errors in those two towns, they've probably made glaring errors in others. So I think it's important to see that number get reduced.
Sorry. There's a lot of different entities you've mentioned, just here in the city of Summit, the governing body, I assume that little subcommittee will get a piece of the action, the planning board. Before you kind of show all of the city's cards, right, on how we're going to approach this, can you explain the decision-making process, where at least this body is going to fit into this component then relative to the master plan reexamination?
Okay.
Just so we don't miss any meetings or,
Okay, no, I appreciate that. For the housing plan and the housing plan process, it's the governing body that is obligated to adopt a resolution by January 31st. Say we either accept the number or we don't. Our view is that we would be sending in a resolution that says we accept that number, but we understand that we're going to be entitled to a vacant land adjustment. And I would suggest we do this rehab analysis quickly, and we'll do it with your office. So we could include that adjustment in that resolution. The housing plan itself is a product of the planning board, and it's technically solely the product of the planning board. Now, I know the governing body likes to get involved in these things in many municipalities, but the municipal land use law is clear in terms of who's responsible for it. So you get to deal with the preparation of the document, you get to deal with the flack from the public. The governing body gets to deal with the flack when they have to adopt the ordinances that you'll prepare for the governing body.
Joe, can you speak for a second? If we put on, after a windshield survey, we go around and we condition our resolution. And if the governing body then passes that, it's a yes, but acceptance of the number.
Yes.
What's the state's time to respond? Do they have to accept what we said?
30 days.
They have 30 days, right?
This is what the interesting part. And I will tell you that in this new legislation, in this new world of affordable housing, with the fourth round, the state has established what's called the Affordable Housing Dispute Resolution Board. It's made up of 7 retired judges, and they have staff, but they are also reaching out to a number of us special masters, or now special adjudicators, to assist them in reviewing all the documents that come flooding in to them. When you submit your number, and by January 31st, beginning February 1, anyone, a developer, Fair Share Housing Center, anyone, interested citizen, can object to the number. They have to provide detail. The legislation spells out the detail that they have to provide along with that objection. And that's the month of February. And then in the month of March, it says, the legislation says that I'll just call it the program. The program is going to resolve all disputes. Now, I mentioned Parsippany a moment ago. We had 15 objectors in Parsippany alone, and it took 8.5 years to resolve all of those disputes. Some of you saw how long it took to get our housing plan adopted. In the borough of Alpine, we had one objector. We just had our final compliance hearing about a month ago. It took 7 years to resolve that one dispute. But the program's going to do it all for every municipality in the state.
In March.
In the month of March. Thank
Yeah.
God they picked a 31-day month. That's all
Yeah,
I can say.
But Joe, if we accept the number and our dispute is only with the rehab, I mean, I guess somebody could object to that, but that's not really, that's not a developer's interest as much as.
No, that
No.
wouldn't be.
No, so, okay. I mean, I'm not advising the council on what to do, but I'm just saying.
But when you
Looking
adopt,
realistically.
when you go to adopt your housing plan, there's another round of potential objection
Based on our calculation for,
based on the site selection,
oh, right.
based on densities that you selected. You know, I'm in Middletown, I'm the adjudicator there, and we have 3 developers that are still fighting over what the proper density should be for certain sites. And, you know, the municipality is down here, and needless to say, the developers are way up here in terms of what they feel the density should be. So don't think that at the end of March, you know, your opposition is gone away. It's still, there's
Okay,
other
thank you for that.
potentials down the road.
Thank you.
Does that work?
I have 3 questions, so we can answer them one at a time or all at once if you want. So my first question is, I guess to that effect, we have judgment of compliance and repose until what month of 2025?
Well, it's good till July 1.
July
Yeah,
1 of
I was gonna say
2025.
June 30th.
Technically,
End of June, okay.
Yeah, it's
so-
June
So
30th.
the city of Summit has judgment of compliance and repose until the end of June 2025,
Well,
correct?
For
to
your
be fair,
third
you-
round.
you
For
can-
third round, yep.
For the third round, yeah, you continue to have it so long as you meet the deadlines.
Right.
And don't get it taken away. But
Yeah.
at this point,
Mhm.
it becomes, for the 4th round, I'm sorry for interrupting, Joe.
It's okay.
Only with the chair's permission.
Oh, please.
Thank you. But it becomes deadline driven. So
Yeah.
most of these deadlines that Joe's talking about, if you blow the deadline, you risk losing the
Okay.
community.
Not only risk, the legislation
Well,
actually
automatic,
says,
yeah.
unless there's a very special exception
Yeah.
for why you blew the deadline,
Mm-hmm.
you lose your immunity.
Okay. And then I guess the second question is, with the numbers that just came out, I forget the term, Joe, it's vacant land, but in the state's terms, it's, what was the?
Land
Vacant land
capacity.
adjustment.
Land capacity. So if we say, okay, we had 2.34 acres of vacant land, how does that, I know land capacity means it's the city of Summit's land across divided by the state of New Jersey's vacant land, is that correct?
That is correct.
So what is that number? And how do we argue and say that our assumption of vacant land, because I agree with you, we shouldn't start over, we should just say, it was 2.34, we developed an acre, we lost 2 acres, I mean, it's not rocket science, right?
Right.
So how do you handle that?
But one of the things we're going to do for you is, and actually we've already done it, we have asked DCA to give us the actual mapping rather than, you know, these 3,000 pages of material. We want to see the actual mapping that they've used to identify where vacant sites are and where not, because in some instances, they've already published very rough mapping. It doesn't tell you a lot, but in one instance, it told us enough to realize that while a town has 110 units of inclusionary development under construction right now, for the 4th round database, that map already shows that as still vacant. So they're obviously counting that acreage a second time. It was counted under the third round, it's counted, now it's being counted again. So as part of the process for you, while we're not attacking the number per se, we may be attacking some of the analysis, and we need that additional mapping. We have not yet received it from you, for you. They told us it could take 3 or 4 weeks before we get it, and this conversation took place Friday or Thursday, and so this past Thursday. So time will be cut short if we don't get this until, Thanksgiving. We're not going to have all that much time to prepare all the analysis for you and make sure we get it in for the governing body to adopt this resolution. I mean, we will do it, but you could understand the time constraint that we're under.
But Joe, back to Mr. Spur's comment, what about our role and what's going to be expected of this board in terms of between now and January 25th and then after?
Okay. What I would suggest is that we are starting the background database for you. There's a lot of background information. We have to update some of the mapping because for whatever reason, under the third round, they identified certain specific databases that you use to determine wetlands and buffers and steep slopes and the like. Some of that has changed with the fourth round. So some of it, not all of it, but some of it we have to do again. And that'll be step one for us. And as we prepare these documents, we want to come before you and have a work session to talk about what this all means. But the real work will be done, after January.
Okay.
In connection with the housing element and fair share plan that has to be adopted by June 30.
Right. When this board will sit down and we'll think about overlay zones, or we'll think about changing all the different issues that we'd have.
Yeah, because what we want to do in that score is start to identify not so much vacant sites, obviously, but sites that may have some redevelopment potential that's worth talking about. And I'd rather have lots of discussions on that type of issue, rather than just going over updated census information. Because, it's nice to talk about, but it's not going to get us very far in terms of, the real planning that has to be done.
Mr. Chairman, if I may through you, I think what Mr. Spur is trying to ask you, Mr. Burgess, and the chairman is, we're working on these things in the Mount Laurel Committee. We're working on redevelopment potential, and sometimes it feels like it might be more appropriate to be here. As much as I love my fellow council members and the people on the Mount Laurel Subcommittee, for some reason, it just feels more like, and I think we're looking for some direction, it feels like it should be here because as my fellow council members aren't planners and we don't understand the zoning and the density, and it feels like it's almost, not saying it's in an inappropriate place right now, but I think we're just looking for direction because sometimes it feels like we're doing things twice.
Okay, I think the best place to do it is here, because you're the ones who are going to adopt the plan in the end. I had been under the impression that someone had made the choice that, there's this committee made up of some council people, but it does belong here. And maybe, I have some towns that are doing a subcommittee of primarily planning board members and a couple governing body members and somebody from, staff in the municipality to work with us.
Just for the record, someone from his firm, and typically Joe is on that call, but I think what I'm looking for is just some guidance on how other municipalities do that, 'cause sometimes it just seems a little bit.
I think one of the concerning things, and maybe preaching to the choir on this, is the expedited time frame, the lack of back and forth between the respective state entities and the municipalities is cutting out one other stakeholder group, which is the public. And we just don't, from a procedural standpoint, can't offer robust public input in the appropriate ways. And I suspect you as the planner will offer some guidance on when it is appropriate and in what manner it's appropriate to invite broad-based public input. In a way, we're representative of the public, but
No, I understand that. And what I intend to have happen is once we have some of that background database complete, so we have
Proposals.
something important to say rather than just have a discussion. And, you know, I want to be able to talk about sites sooner rather than later, because that's what's really going to drive the bus in the end. And the vacant land adjustment, fortunately, although some of the methodology of preparing it has changed a little bit from what they required in the past, it doesn't alter it all that much for Summit because we know where the vacant sites are already. So it should be a fairly quick process for us to put that together for you.
Great. For the new members, I think everybody should know that Joe is one of the experts in New Jersey for housing and for this process. You're a special master for other
Yeah, for and
municipalities.
quite a number of judges throughout the
Can you
state.
tell them what that is?
What, special master? They actually, for years it was called special master, and then about, what was it, 6 months ago?
It's special adjudicator now.
Yeah, they changed it. We got this letter from the Supreme Court that said the term special master has inappropriate connotations. So they changed it to special adjudicator.
Got it.
And my initial reaction was, I have a master's degree, does that get changed?
You have an
too?
adjudicator's degree now. Unfortunately, you're conflicted out of special adjudicating us, so.
That is true. Yeah, they've actually asked for a list of all the towns we represent to make sure that they don't
Yeah.
assign,
Yeah.
Right.
have that conflict.
So we're in very good hands.
Well,
And
thank you.
After you do a lot of your very detailed work, we will then get, I presume, some recommendations for planning changes that will facilitate the housing element.
Yes.
And then we can discuss those, and that will be on the agenda, and people will know. And they can come and
Yeah.
talk about it too.
The one thing I have to stress is there will be a need for, quite a number of work session meetings. And we have to try to be flexible with that because, I have some towns that say, here, do it. And there's none of this interaction. My experience here is a little different. So I expect a lot of give and take. And that's probably the better way because you end up with a much better plan that way. That really represents the public interest. And the public will be drawn in at some point.
If I may, Joe is being humble because he didn't explain what a special master or
That's
special
Oh,
adjudicator is, but so I want to do it on his behalf, if I may, real quick, and that is, because he shouldn't be humble. They are basically the court's expert on affordable housing, the judge's expert, the Mount Laurel judges in the third round, one for each vicinage, who made these decisions, had an expert who did a report. And the vast majority of the times, those judges abide by the report from their expert. So that was and remains Joe's position. He is the court's expert on affordable housing, and the vast majority of the time, if not all the time, the Mount Laurel judge will, his report will be, in essence, the judge's decision. So,
Well, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, then I won't be humble. No, I just want to say one thing which is good for us, I think, that of the 7 retired judges, I was the special master for 3 of them. So at least we have that in, for lack of a better word.
And all but one
know
were
you.
Mount Laurel judges.
But, so, Joe, let's take it back. Thank you for that, and for explaining the housing element and how it's going to affect us. But that was a digression from your original conversation with us, which is how to choose what we should be doing with the master
Yeah,
plan.
we really got off track there.
That's the
But
big
I think
Megillah.
it
Yeah.
reinforced how busy the housing plan is going to make us over the next, 8 months or so. And because of that, the municipal land use law says that you have to do a reexamination report or a new master plan at least once every 10 years. You did it in November of 2016, so we technically have until then to do one. But if we don't want to get pressed at some point, we could do a very brief, very specific reexamination report document that you can approve. And again, that's also your responsibility, not the governing bodies. And then we can, you know, breathe a little easier in terms of when we have to do it. I mean, you really do need a new master plan, quite frankly. Yours is 24 years old. You did the REX in 2016, which is fairly comprehensive, and it had some elements of a master plan. It had specific goals and objectives, for example, but it lacked a lot of other things that a master plan in the statute requires. So I think that's the easiest and best approach for you, so you could just move quickly into the housing plan.
Good.
I guess the question, does anyone have any comment on that?
I do, actually. It became a topic of discussion considering the municipal budget that on whether the board would not be interested in going out and seeking requests for services or proposals on a master plan reexamination. It appears that a lot of the intention and, you know, Joe's input is going to be focused on affordable housing matters, so it would not be unreasonable for the board to consider submitting an individual request for qualification for a master plan reexamination or a new master plan. And it would also allow the city to more appropriately budget for this project and, you know, to avoid any excess in public spending. So.
Is there anything in the budget for any of these scenarios?
So as we're currently planning next year's operating, we have sought quotes and proposals across the board for how much this would cost, Burgess included. However, to, you know, hold consultants to account, it's also good to get a formal qualification in so that we may lock them in on that pricing. And this is quite a significant operational matter. You know, this is a scope of work that is going to range maybe 12 to 18 months overall, and just on maybe master plan re-exam. That's what we've been hearing. And if we want to do a new master plan, that is the case.
Yeah, clearly, a new master plan is going to be an 18-month effort. The re-exam that I was speaking of is a very simplified version of it to just make you legal. You know, one of the interesting things about not just the REX, but the full-blown master plan that you'll end up doing is a lot of the information that we're going to be providing in the housing plan, we could then use that, you know, as part of the master plan, which would help cut costs a little bit.
Right, so as I understand, we could, well, I think that's something we should talk about a little bit, think about a little bit. I don't think we have to decide right now. Yeah, okay.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I do think there's also a cost associated from losing the professional expertise that we've had over the last couple of years with Mr. Burgess. So, you know, there's a huge, and I'm all about going for RFPs. I say it all the time. I just think with this tight timeline, doing a re-exam might make the most sense, you know,
And to be,
with the knowledge that we have.
to be perfectly clear, no, we would not be losing his services, right? The board planner would remain. This would be a separate, specific item to which in certain meetings they would appear and present in conjunction and would likely require collaboration with our board planner, right? But separate line items so that it can be adequately accounted for.
Right, so we would be, I mean, we did use a different planner at a different time for a different project, you know, under a fixed budget, so that's not unheard of. We've also could continue to use Burgess, but you're suggesting that they bid a particular price for.
Yeah,
Doing-
I mean,
doing
they
the
would be
re-exam.
entitled, yes, they'd be entitled to also apply and provide their proposal, to which you could decide to award that. It's just procedurally locking in these budget items so that we do not exceed, you know, any.
Typically, when there's a special project of any kind, like this housing element is clearly a special project.
Yes.
Doesn't Burgess give you some kind of estimate on how much it's going to be for additional
Yeah, we
services
did.
regardless?
Yes, absolutely, they do. The overlap issue becomes how the city handles its municipal purchasing procedure as opposed alongside its contractual not to exceed amounts and how it manages to get work done. I'm not recommending this based off of the recommendation is based off of we know that there is a lot of work
Yes.
to be done. So by potentially doing this, you would not run across any purchasing related issue if you need to make an amendment to a, contractual not to exceed. That's what I'm saying. It's a step towards accountability for the taxpayer. It's not about Joe's services, the great. It's just
No,
about
and if
that.
I may, he's 100% right, and, we've sat in the last 2 weeks just going over invoices, and sometimes it does get muddy with what does the planning board want, what are we requiring from a housing element and fair share plan, and then all of a sudden we have, his planner sitting in going over permit applications during the week. So it does get really, really complicated, and I think we're just trying to, protect the taxpayer and make sure that our lines are very clearly defined, because it gets very, very complicated.
And by the fact that this board sets its rates on its current RFPs, it would be entirely your choice who you go with.
Right.
This would not be a circumstance where we say it's the lowest bidder. It's the overall qualification of the applying firm. So, there are tons of great firms in the area that the city has used and continues to use, and it is up to the board. Keep that in mind.
No, we appreciate that. We also would have to design the scope of the project, and that's something that we're just grasping with right now as to what.
We should decide
what-
which
what the
direction we want to go.
So maybe just with respect
As well.
then to the budgetary process, when do we as the board need to make a decision on which of the three paths?
By making it, let's say, if you want to specifically create a request for qualification for this process, there's not necessarily a deadline. It is just a secondary item where the board is going to say, we are going to award this contract and we will need to set aside municipal funds for it. And through our municipal process, in conjunction with finance, we would just separate those funds for it, right? There's no deadline on the board. It's entirely optional.
But from a budgetary perspective, I assume.
From the.
Out of respect for the preparation of the operating budget.
Absolutely.
I know we can just send a bill out, up to the city administrator's office and the CFO. Tammy would love that.
No.
Probably shouldn't make that a practice.
No, absolutely. I believe that we're expected by the end of December to lock in our operating budgets and not expect any reasonable changes, so.
I have one question, through you, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please.
When will the escrow accounts be available for round 4? Do you know, Joe? Or how does that work for affordable housing round? Are they available?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, because
So like
escrow.
right now, for example, we're talking about round 4 specifically, so.
Yeah, but that's not escrow.
It's
Right,
trust.
it's not escrow, so, I'm sorry, trust fund. So, because I'm just trying to think of.
The affordable housing, round 4 affordable housing trust is what you're referring
Right.
to? Right now, the city is limited in how it can use this round 3. It's only for round 3 items.
Correct.
When does round 4 become available? And how does that transfer?
That will start beginning in January of 2025. Yeah. Yeah, and the regulations are such that 20% of your housing trust fund can be used for administrative costs, which includes lawyers and planners' fees. I would like to say one thing, though.
Yeah.
The firm has been around for a long time, like over 40 years now, or close to 40 years. And we often have multiple contracts on different project items for a municipality. So it's not difficult for us to separate out the work we do in a housing plan versus a ordinance versus a REX. In fact, we've done that for you on different things, where we've done redevelopment plans and ordinances and the like separately. I don't think there's ever been any confusion in terms of submission of bills and how, as to what is getting paid for what service. I do want to point out, though, for you that I firmly believe that you shouldn't be doing a very complex reexamination report. The end result is whatever reacts you do, I think the conclusion is going to be you need to do a full-blown master plan. And I think that you could do the bare minimum for a reacts just to make you legal, to be very cost-effective. And the end conclusion will be you need to do a new master plan. But that alone, that document alone will give you the new 10-year time frame to do the master plan.
Yes. And I think, I'm glad you circled us back to the question at hand, which is which way do we want to go? Do we want to do a full master plan? Do we want to do a reacts, or do we want to do a mini reacts that checks all the legal boxes? And I definitely think, under the circumstances and with all that we have on our plates, that we should do that by the 10 years, because I do think we had a much heavier reacts in 2016. So we got a lot of input from tons of our community members, not hundreds, but I dare say maybe 1,000 or more, just tons and tons of input. So I think we can make do with a skinnier reacts now, so that we can buy time to plan for the next one. That would be my
Perhaps an additional
recommendation.
consideration is the fact that statutorily, as of now at least, by June 30 of 2025, you're going to have a full-blown housing element and fair share plan, brand new, done and completed. Boom.
Right, which is an essential
Along-
element of whatever
You
plan
put
we
it in,
follow.
yeah.
It's a significant element, in my
Yeah.
opinion, it's a very significant element.
Plugs into what we're
Right.
gonna do
Of
anyway.
a master plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
think
it's
Joe
gonna be
did as
very-
much or more work than we did on the whole rest of it, all the other
Yeah.
elements.
And it's going to be very time-consuming on your parts as well.
Yeah.
So to also be trying to do the heavy lift on a large-scale reacts or a new master plan, I think.
So are we calling it down and dirty or skinny reacts?
I think for the public, skinny sounds better than down and dirty.
Okay.
Lean and mean.
What
Lean
do
and
other
mean.
folks think, though, about
Does anyone
that?
have any other thoughts?
Sorry, when does the skinny reacts need to be done by?
It doesn't have to be done until 2026 anyway. So
But that we have
you
half
that
of-
time.
We would only have half of next year really to focus on it.
Right, no, I
I mean, you
understand.
could really
Would we
decide-
potentially, if we went the skinny reacts, would we kind of roll straight into the full-blown because we're getting all the numbers back from the fair share? Or, there's this period of time that we have 10 years, right? So,
Right now, you have 2 years.
right, but after we do the reacts,
Right.
we'll have 10 more,
I mean-
correct?
Yes.
Correct.
We don't have to wait
Right.
10.
We probably
don't have
don't
to
want
We
to
don't
wait.
have to wait 10, but it would get us through
Yeah,
this
yeah, exactly.
busy
That's what I'm
time.
getting at.
But
And we
you-
probably want that to, if we're working on all of this stuff,
Right.
to move right into it after these other pieces.
Other things are done. So
That's the
You
reasonable
might want
approach.
to
Yeah.
hold off
Do
on
it a
the,
lot sooner
on the
than-
If we take
reacts.
like a year break and we're like, we're cool with that, then,
Yeah.
yeah.
You could hold off on doing that react until the latter part of 25 or even the early part of 26. You could do it to save the budget that way.
That's what we should-
But then still consider a quick down and dirty to give you the time to
Skinny.
skinny, to do the full-blown master plan after that.
Julia has a question.
I guess my question is, so I think we've all agreed on that, if I may say, but the bigger question for me is if the housing element fair share plan is due January of 2025?
Yeah.
No, only
our
only
decision to
thing
accept the number.
due,
Well, we have to forward
Right.
to city council, and they have to sign it before.
That's the
January
recommendation to
31st.
take the number, and then we have to work
That's
on.
the
I'm
simple-
I'm
How to-
looking at
how
your
to get
memo,
to it.
Joe, which says require the planning board to adopt a housing element fair share plan by June 30th, 2025. Sorry, not January. So we have to
no,
adopt
the
it.
number, the housing
the-
obligation.
Okay, so we
With that
don't need
caveat that
to-
we're gonna do the vacant
Okay,
land
so the
adjustment.
housing element fair share plan is not due in June of 2025?
No, the housing element and fair share plan is due
June 30.
June 30th, yes, I had to remember how many
That's what I
days
said,
it
Yes,
is.
you-
2025.
he
Oh, you said
didn't hear you.
June.
No, sorry, I meant initially, so the housing
On
element
the-
fair share plan is due when?
June 30th of '25.
It would be great if we could
The
stand
planning
up.
board has to adopt it. I believe, frankly, the governing body endorses it.
And by
Endorses it.
January, we have to
and,
agree not to
uh,
fight the number.
Okay.
And also at that time, you also have to have draft implementation ordinances.
No,
there's a lot of work
actually,
for council
the
to-
new schedule provides until March of '26 to do all your ordinances.
Those are the actual ordinances.
Yes,
But
to adopt
you're
the
supposed
ordinance.
to have draft ordinances, well, we could, I don't wanna,
Yeah, but
by June 30,
they're
with
not
the housing.
full-blown drafts. They're like a zoning schedule and that sort of thing.
If I may, just
Really?
if we could get this information collated and put on like the city website, since it seems like there's some unknowns even within this room on the dates, and we keep going back and forth, it would be really helpful, wouldn't it be, for?
Yeah,
oh,
no, that's-
God.
We have that memo prepared. I'll reissue it.
And then can we get it up publicly
Yes.
for everyone?
I'm sorry, I
to
missed
see?
that.
Just to collate all these dates into a timeline,
The
and
schedule.
then present that to not only ourselves, but to the public as well.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
So, and then
Okay.
we'll make these discussions probably 10% of the time that we're taking, because
Steph-
a lot of this is like, what date is it again? Is it June? Is it
We
July?
can absolutely-
Is it
Yeah,
26? Is it
Stephanie,
25?
I'll reissue that for you,
That's fine.
because the
Thank you.
dates that have passed, and we've done that,
Okay, so I think,
don't have to be on that
I
schedule.
think we're in agreement on the skinny plan. I think we're going to table for the moment the RFP conversation. And, you know, Joe even suggested we could delay this quite a bit, considering when we actually have to start working on it. So I'll come back to everybody with that. And what's next?
DRO.
The DRO conversation.
Get late. Will you just say yay, nay on like, these aren't that difficult or complicated, most of them. Like include, don't include for the city council for consideration, like most of them.
Yeah, these are recommendations to council on the various topics that we talked about last meeting.
Checks.
Right, there's a few things that really do require the board to have some discussion on.
Right.
Okay.
So real quick, before we get started, if I may, real
Yeah.
quick question. How would this procedurally work? We're going to go through this, we're going to make a recommendation to council, it's going to be through some sort of ordinance or?
Right, I would assume we're going to resolve some of the open-ended items, and then we'll prepare the ordinances.
And then
Okay.
it gets sent up and then they just.
All right, so it'll be based on the language in this memo,
Yep.
Right.
as we
This
amended.
proposed language and then a few, open
So
ended.
just from a timing perspective though, Joe, sorry.
That's kind of what, yeah.
Ordinances would come to us to
Yes.
adopt essentially the
do the
formal.
final
To
read.
forward to the
Yeah.
governing
So-
body.
So just from a timing perspective, that's November. Then they would go to the governing body as soon as December for their consideration and adoption as soon as January, just in terms of timeframe. Because I think for me at least, the most important thing to really consider here is this should be an annual exercise. So now that this is something we haven't really made a habit of doing in years past, we just understand the timeframe with which we need to operate to really turn it over in a relatively expeditious time.
Yeah, no, none of these are,
Particularly contentious.
very
Yeah.
difficult.
And we may want to exclude the particularly
Yeah,
contentious.
for item number one, if I
Before you
may.
do though, if I may, just to be clear, because there is as you know, a process. And so, once the planning board makes recommendations, even as specific as, here's an ordinance we recommend to the governing body to adopt, as I believe everyone knows, you introduce it, they introduce it first, we master plan consistency review it,
Right.
35 days or less. And then on second read, public hearing, the governing body can adopt it. So it could be done in a couple of months.
But it might be a little longer.
I don't know, I don't want to say, but I don't think it could be any shorter than a couple of months, put it that way.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Okay.
And if I may, just not to throw, but if we have 14 in here and we have only X amount of dollars for Mr. Burgess to work on housing out and fair share in round 3 or round 4, like, I guess, how do we, if we come across tonight and we say you've got 10 or 12, and that's gonna take you 40 or 50 hours, right? Like, how do we prioritize and again, I'm probably trying.
Most of them are written. Like,
So
it's
they're
just
already
short.
done,
Yeah,
right?
most of them, not all of them, and we could just,
Right.
if we don't have the money or the time, we
Right.
could just
Okay.
delete them. But some of them are just
We've been working on
clean
these
up.
for years, right?
Yeah, no.
For the most part, like, I've
Yeah, a
seen
lot
it.
of, some of this, yeah.
Can you answer that, Joe? Sorry, just from a level of effort perspective, and then I saw Augusto kind of shift his seat a little bit here on the budget point, sorry, you have a tell. Because again, if we were doing this on an annualized basis, and we want to line them in the operating budget to say DRO review and revision, what is the level of effort for, say, 10 of these relatively modest revisions to be reflected into ordinances and then kind
In
of shepherded
terms-
through the process.
In terms of time, probably 6 weeks or so.
Okay.
And I only say that because of, you know, the league and the holidays and whatnot, but it's probably in about 6, 7 weeks at the outside.
So that for me is just kind of a trigger to say, end of the year, like everything is not probably the best time of year to be doing these kind of things. Maybe it's an ambition of early fall is a little bit of a quieter period that gives us the front half of the year to consider the options.
Remind me when we get the zoning report typically?
It should be in the end of the first quarter of the year was the change we made.
Right.
So you have it at the beginning of the year.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. The first item is the wireless regulations. You know, you could simply re-adopt what you had previously, or we can prepare a whole new ordinance. We have lots of standard models for wireless. That's up to you as to what you
I
would.
think it's just the protection from those giant cell towers right downtown, because we don't have 106 review anymore for the downtown. 106 review is something for historic districts that automatically used to happen at the state level, and we were protected somewhat from things that weren't compatible with the historic district, at least for our downtown, and now that's no longer, it's exempted from that. So that's why it's there.
Okay. This is not a heavy lift at all.
Okay.
And just so let's recall our conversation from last time, is that we spent a decent amount of time and energy on the 5G ordinance. So does that have to do with this?
I'm sorry.
The 5G ordinance that we worked on?
Is that the small cell, Joe?
Yeah, that's the small cell. So it's part of this, yes.
Okay, because I'm just going to say that this one, I just want to understand how that works into this, because I looked at the bills for this one, and I was like, oh my gosh, I think we could have written the wireless ordinance for the state of New Jersey. So I just want to understand. I just want to understand, and I mean.
We covered a lot more than land use.
No, I know, I
This
just
is
want to let's just dumb it down and like really talk about what the problem is with what we have, which was recently updated, and this number one, because I don't understand.
There's some minor tweaks that need to be done to it. It's not a heavy lift at all.
To
So I
give
guess-
us tools so we can just say, can you move it 2 blocks that way? Or, you know, can we
This is to give us-
modify?
This is to give us some control over large towers. And this is not about 5G small towers.
It-
Or it-
Whatever you guys wanted to include.
But
I
also,
just,
the technology is a moving target. It's always going to be. So we're always going to have to wrestle with this in some way. Because every 5 years,
Right,
something's
it
gonna come
changes.
up and change.
Joe said
true.
it's not a heavy lift. He's got stock language from other municipalities. I would suggest we get something, so we have some tools, because if we have a problem and we have nothing in the DRO, then we're legally exposed. But if we have some language, at least we can say something about it if it comes up.
Exactly.
And it sounds like we can keep moving with the technology. Once a year, if we had to revisit, if it was necessary, we would.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, great.
The short-term rental issue, this is really not an issue that you're facing from what we understand. I know Krista had always been interested in saying it's prohibited.
She wants to restrict the Airbnb.
She had
because-
always wanted to, and it was brought up again. So we're just
So are we-
raising it if you want to. And we have the
People feel about-
language.
Do we feel?
I mean, what do neighboring towns do? Like, I did some quick Googling, doesn't seem, Milburn allows it, Maplewood allows it, Short Hills allows it, well, that's Milburn. Chatham allows it, like, isn't that, you can put requirements, like violation if they don't adhere to a rental agreement, or if they have too many units and they're operating them more like a hotel,
Well,
in a
that's why-
business, but like, I feel like if we just eliminate the residents from being able to use Airbnb, seems like it's a little counterintuitive for,
The language that we drafted doesn't eliminate it. It just says that you can't rent them for more than a 30-day consecutive period,
Okay.
which is the standard language.
is that similar
Less
to like
than
what other
30 days.
jurisdictions do?
Yes.
Less than 30 days.
Mm-hmm. And that one's already written.
But that's saying, and that makes it a regular month-to-month rental. It doesn't, that eliminates Airbnb.
Right, you could just
Correct,
re-rent it
But
for another
this
30
this
days.
requires you to have to treat your unit as a regular rental unit, not as an Airbnb. So that's how I read this.
The 30 days keeps every like 3 days, you don't want your neighbor
Right.
renting their house every 3 days to a different person.
Oh,
It
to
could be
to receive
Disruptive
compensation of any
language.
kind for the use, occupancy, or rental of any dwelling for a period of less than 30 consecutive days.
That's the issue that others have mentioned.
Less than 30 consecutive
You
days.
can't rent them out.
You must lease it for 30 days or more.
Right.
That's,
So you
I don't
get-
have a strong opinion
Or if
on
you did it
this.
for 3 days, you'd have to wait 30 days before you could do it again?
No, you wouldn't, I mean, you wouldn't be allowed to rent it for 3 days.
Okay, so then Airbnb's not an option.
Correct. Right, I mean,
So then-
Airbnb is,
Goes for 3 months or 2 months or 6 months, you can rent
Couple
an Airbnb.
days.
Yeah, oh, you can rent them for long term. You're just saying no short term.
short-term.
No, sure, do you want your neighbor having someone come in every 3 to 5 days, you know, with Jersey Shore rentals? Do you want someone coming in every 3 to 5 days with a new group of
Ooh,
people?
you need your mic.
Oh, it's just a constant turnover.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's.
That's usually
This is
the
standard language.
objection
This is
to it.
written in many, like this.
Oh, okay, all right.
So I'm assuming you copied this from something else. You
Yes,
Use this somewhere
mhm.
else, because I've
Yeah,
seen
no,
this.
this is,
Okay, I was thinking vacation, week vacations, I'm Airbnb somewhere.
It does keep out, you can't
You can't do the week.
yeah,
do the.
Right.
so
But you can
it's
do a longer
restrictive
term.
language to keep the long term.
You can do a summer rental.
A month.
yeah.
And I'm just hearing some people saying they're indifferent and it hasn't been an issue. So if it hasn't been an issue and we're indifferent, or most of us are, then I don't see the need to do anything on this one,
Do you
personally.
see it much?
I mean, we could always address it whenever.
No.
We should keep it on our radar.
All right,
I don't.
so Joe doesn't see it much either, so
I mean,
maybe,
some towns
this
have
time.
done it because of particular problems those
Right.
municipalities have had with people renting party houses,
yeah.
you know, a house for a night or a weekend,
yeah.
and
Joe, if we
That's
do
what beach
nothing,
towns have.
if we do nothing,
it's a policy.
do we have regulations in place to monitor, enforce, restrict if,
No, you don't.
If anything, maybe like a first step would be to like require a permit, so that we know. we
They-
can
they
actually
should have to get
we
like
can
a
actually
rental
get some-
agreement.
We can get some data on like what's actually happening.
I'll tell you what, why don't I put something together? And then you can decide, you know, like the comment with the permit is a good idea. I'll put together a few things and then you'll decide.
Or we can wait till next time. You know. What do you think?
well, I mean, but again, this is like technology's changed, right? So this didn't exist 10 years ago, 5 years ago.
Right.
Maybe 5 years ago. 10 years ago, Airbnb wasn't a thing. So we probably,
No.
something we should, in some way, shape, or form, look at.
Patrice, what do you feel?
I've seen it,
I mean, if you have this, like I said, what he's already written is actually covers and protects, I think, the city. And I'm living right next door to a four condo unit. If he doesn't sell those units, the first thing I thought of is this guy's gonna start doing that because he wants to cover his costs. Which is fine, I'm not against anyone, but it does create, if you've ever lived next door to one of these situations, it can go either way. You can get kids renting it for a night and they'll have, 100 kids. Like, it can explode or it cannot. I
And
don't really
that's-
have,
yeah.
and Summit is, I don't know, a diverse community, and I just don't know if we can really feel what the future will hold. I really
Yeah.
don't. So I think this language here is great. I don't think it needs to have any more or any less. It just kind of covers it so that someone can, if something does occur, you have some jurisdiction in place to.
Well, let me take a poll of people.
Yeah, I
Are
mean,
we-
I don't-
are we ready
again,
to take a poll right now on
it's only-
whether people feel like we should go with this, or we should just wait?
Sure.
I mean, we could always rescind it in a year if it becomes problematic.
Or the opposite, we could readdress it in a
Or we
year.
could readdress it.
if Ever becomes a
I
problem.
don't think it's necessary at this time. I just think it's already well-written.
thank you.
When we do.
So it's well-written and it can sit.
Well written and the work is done.
Does anyone else want to
So-
weigh in?
I mean, I just think it should be consistent with what neighboring towns are doing. We shouldn't do anything more or less if we don't see an issue, but we shouldn't be at a disadvantage.
It is
Our
gen-
residents shouldn't be at a disadvantage to
Yeah, it is generally consistent.
Jersey Shore, much different, like, they're different purposes.
Yeah,
that's it.
that's where you're seeing some
Yeah.
of the problems.
Yeah.
Okay. So you want to pause until next year?
Does anyone feel strongly we should move forward with it? Okay, I think we'll pause.
Okay.
I hear pause.
It's the kind of thing we gotta keep on the agenda.
I
Yeah,
agree.
keep
Fine,
it
fine.
on the agenda, yeah.
Fine, and we'll all cross our fingers for Patrice and her neighbor.
Next year. Okay.
Mountain Strolls in
Springfield.
Springfield, I mean, how did they handle that during like the tournaments? Does that, something
You
like
can
that?
rent your home out.
You can rent your own
That's a
out.
good
Doesn't apply
example.
here.
Yeah, they rented
can
their home
rent
and
your own. Did happen.
they rented their front lawns for parking.
The shore issue is more of an issue here. But anyway. Well,
I don't think that'll-
Accessory structures, you want to move on?
Yeah, accessory structures, let's go.
Yeah, the issue of the definition of lot coverage or impervious coverage really came up because someone was concerned about, we have sport fields and do we count them as impervious coverage even if it's turf? I've never quite understood why you would think that if it's turf. The
Yeah, I don't know
question-
where that came from, actually.
Right.
It might have come from Tom's list from Burgess. Maybe it's been discussed, at community services and stuff like that.
No, he had said it had been discussed. I don't know who raised it.
Subcommittee didn't have it on our list, but
So are we suggesting here that we would take that out and not, and that we?
the underliner added language.
had
says
added
sport court,
item
fields,
A,
and services,
But we were
including
just questioning whether that's, because it says whether it's permeable or not.
would be considered
So,
lot coverage.
to weigh in on this question came up during, I believe, a zoning review and engineering reviews of incoming permits in town. What happens is, depending on the builder's specifications for how the turf is set up, it will fundamentally alter whether it is permeable or impermeable, and that impacts, if it is impermeable, impacts the lot coverage. So I think this language is just sought to make it clear that if in a permit application, the specifications of that turf demonstrates that it is impermeable, it is accounted for in the section of ordinance. This is a very, very specific case. It was brought up with Tom between our engineers.
What
and
you're saying,
zoning.
that makes sense.
Yeah, this says whether
But
it's
this says
permeable or
whether
not.
it's permeable or not, and that's
Well,
where I was drawing the
Not
line.
variability, because that can.
That can change
the
over
level
time.
of permeability can change over time depending on the use and what the
Yeah.
material underneath are. They can get, like you were talking, I feel like
Oh,
one of the
right.
things you brought up driveways.
That's right,
and
gravel driveways,
But if
They become
compact over
compacted,
time, they
yeah.
start out permeable, but
they end up
2 years
not being.
later,
Yeah.
it's a different story. So
Right.
maybe there's a version of that.
Maybe that's why.
In
How do
the
people feel
original-
about it?
In the original conversation, it was more based on, we're getting a new approval for a permit. What are the conditions that the manufacturer is providing, right? That was the original take. However, wear and tear over time obviously does change. That's a valid point. So perhaps worth rewording based off what the board would prefer.
And for me, it seems like kind of a no-brainer if there are certain specifications that a manufacturer is requiring, and then we're going to be able to allow our professionals to make better decisions, then to me, that would make sense.
I think the concept makes a lot of sense. I don't understand the wording myself, permeable or not. And also like fields, is that a defined term? Like a field could be a field.
Maybe somehow it can be tweaked so that it could just, they have to prove out that it is indeed permeable.
Yeah, is there a rating system that actually exists and is applied by the manufacturer? Because the manufacturer can sort of say whatever they want. I mean, I think we've
Or an
all seen a version of
engineer,
that.
or
But
an
how do you
art,
actually rate that as
Yeah.
permeable?
It might be from an engineer's report that's required, something, so that there's some accountability as to permeability.
Well, I mean, letter D kind of covers it, doesn't it? Any impervious surface, whether or not defined herein.
Okay, so then you
Why
could
do we
just.
say
you're
including
right.
sports courts? Just-
That's a really good point. So
build
then
that
you could
into
just
D.
add the different types of surfaces and be silent on
I think
the,
that's a good point. We should put it
yeah.
there.
Any
You
impervious
could just
surface, sports
cross
courts,
off
fields,
Including sports, yeah.
weather,
sports
from
courts
weather
and
on.
fields,
Including but not
including
limited to.
artificial turf.
Yeah, you could end there.
Yeah.
That works.
It works.
It just gives a little more, oh, by the
Okay.
way, we're thinking about these too.
Right.
What do you think of that?
That could work. I liked someone's comment about providing proof that it won't become impermeable over time.
Okay.
I forget who.
I don't know if you can prove that it becomes impermeable over time. You can
We'll
find out.
just, we'll just do the double negative like we
Yeah,
always
but
do.
Well, if you could submit any evidence that, you know, if you, gravel's not gonna fly, but, you know, the little plastic turf things, you know, don't change.
At least they'd have to put it in their packet and we'd have something
They
to
have
work
something to
with.
work with, yeah,
So that's a keeper, maybe with a little
with a tweak.
impervious discussion.
Combining D and E.
Sorry?
Combining D and E.
Yeah, okay.
Agreed.
All right, Joe.
Okay, accessory structures. In residential zones, no accessory building or structure with a roof shall have a floor or ground area in excess of 576 feet. This was a Krista thing because she wanted to make it clear that this would allow swimming pools not to be included in the calculation. And that was the sole reason for that. I don't know if this was a real hot button issue or not.
I don't
I
know.
mean, does it come
So you
up a lot of?
This is another
zoning?
one that I think came from Tom's list,
Yeah.
you know, because I'm not as familiar with it.
Does it come up a lot at zoning?
I'm not aware that it has.
Yeah.
It hasn't, I mean, if you consider this with respect to like the equipment screening item that we're gonna discuss next, the volume of pool installations in Summit is way less than air conditioning units, for example. So, nice to clean up, I suppose, but.
But this language that's not underlined is already in there, right?
Correct.
So
Yeah.
we're just
Adding
adding
with the
fields,
roof.
artificial turf surfaces, buildings and structures, that's clearer. Because structures could be a sculpture, whatever, and buildings are buildings. So I don't have a problem with those couple of tweaks. Does anybody else?
No, I think it's good.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
so that's a go. Equipment
Exterior.
screening and replacement,
Hold on, wait,
Okay.
sorry, sorry, I feel like we're mixing the two up a little bit,
what?
am I wrong?
Yeah, we started with the pools. and
Well, there
then
were two
we're
items.
Talking about the one under it.
Well, I think that we just have to make sure that,
I think we skipped 30,
we sort of went into 9.8, but then we,
yeah, we never
Agreed.
did B2.
B2 would be accessory structures
Just
with
with
a
a
roof.
roof.
So what's the take on
Just the
that?
underlines is all they're changing. They're just changing
oh, with
this.
the roof.
That's
They're
all
just
they're-
adding, there's adding with a roof
just
to that.
Whatever's underlined is all they're adding for
So we're okay to
for
add the
clarity.
roof?
So I think the biggest one here that I think that I've heard, and Augusta, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is the deck one, right? So if you have a deck with a roof. I don't know, that's what I just remember hearing that from.
But that's not accessory structure, though.
Yeah,
But
that's
that's
an
what-
Because your
addition.
deck, your deck
Because
is,
decks
That's a
are
porch.
attached to the house.
A deck with a roof is a porch, so that would be counted.
Okay.
Anyway. I think you might be thinking of a pergola without a roof, because that was in there somewhere.
Or a pool house, right?
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
okay.
I
Which
see what you're
seemingly
saying.
is
You're talking about B5, I got you.
less common in Summit.
Okay, that makes sense to me, then, I guess.
Okay.
okay, so are we on
Item number 4.
for equipment screening and
Yeah.
replacements?
Now, there's a lot of discussion about, you know, when you can see
Yeah.
exterior mechanical equipment. And the comment was add, you know, from, you know, it has to be screened from view of a public street or from surrounding properties at grade. So if you're looking down from your second-story window,
That doesn't count.
That
that
doesn't
doesn't
count.
count, it has to be at grade.
Mhm.
And then that last sentence in that paragraph, I think should be deleted, because that's been the problem that you've had a lot.
Yeah.
With this, the zoning board has had a lot of those problems, and we'd like to
Completely
see that
unnecessary,
deleted.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
There's existing landscaping or a
You
fence or
should
something.
come,
yeah.
pull your mic up.
That's okay. Go ahead, yeah, we're good.
And the next item came from the zoning board of adjustment.
We're all over that one, yeah. The air conditioning units located in non-conforming locations can still be replaced in kind.
I was just wondering if we should make that residential zones.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Also, like, do we need an administrative approval? As
It's
part
Some-
of
meant
somebody
to
has-
avoid a zoning board application.
Yeah.
Uh,
But I would like to suggest deleting where it says, all other development. You know, it really reads all other development requirements. building code requirements are one thing, but there are some minor provisions elsewhere in the zoning ordinance that might affect the
Okay, so
placement
we
of.
don't want you don't want the unintended consequences
Yeah,
of triggering
that's fine.
some random other development.
Right.
Well,
Sure beats a
but is this-
variance.
but is this to think about like some unforeseen, not even size or visual piece, but something that's more,
An oddity.
like whether maybe it has to do with the wiring, or maybe it has to do with some other component of
Code.
of the,
Item.
yeah.
Well, but code, it says code requirements will still apply.
Right.
We're just saying all other development code issues, which we don't know what that is referring to.
Did you want this to apply to prod zones and big commercial properties as well? Because they can have significant.
Yeah, well, I already had added on residential lots.
I feel like everyone was picturing residential when we talked about it. I don't know
Yes.
if others were thinking about the prod zones and the commercial.
No, it should be on residential lots.
Okay.
Is there a
Okay.
concern with large residential developments other than the ones referred
Like
to?
multi? Yeah.
Do you want to consider
Single
certain
family.
residential zones?
Single
That are
family
more
residential.
homestead lots?
Well, this is just like for like replacements.
Right.
So,
Right.
I mean, we're not assuming that, I mean, I don't really care whether it's residential or commercial. If you got it put in,
I'm sorry, I was morphing back to the screening.
I'm fine with anybody replacing what's already there.
Yeah.
Right. Oftentimes, we've found, though, with the more commercial ones, that it's replacement and a lot of the time. So it turns into a bigger project, but fair enough, up for discussion.
Well, I guess that comes down to the administrative approval. They'd have to perceive it as in kind.
You can also have them on top of office buildings, in-kind
I would be a little
placement.
more careful with the commercial piece.
Okay, so we
It
want
can
to,
get tricky.
so we want to say this applies to residential?
I would say sort of maybe, I mean, even if you put residential not before development, because then it sort of implies you could apply it to commercial development. I think you gotta put the residential word in the first half of that sentence, like existing.
I had added in residential zones, existing air conditioning, yeah, right in the beginning.
Yeah.
Right.
In residential zones, existing air conditioning. Okay, start off with in residential zones, the first words.
Or how about existing air conditioning units located in non-conforming residential locations?
That's good.
How about that?
In non-conforming residential locations.
Or residential non-conforming locations, but somewhere in that
Yeah,
spot.
somewhere in the beginning.
John, that's why you got the law degree.
Whether it's a,
Your English major.
whether
is
it's a
perfect.
residence in a residential zone or it's a non-conforming residential zone, why can't we just say existing air conditioning units on residentially developed lots?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that covers it all.
That's good.
On residentially developed lots. Fine.
Yep.
Okay.
Can we just go back to the previous one real quick, the screening one? From view of the public or from surrounding properties at grade? So we're adding in context where you have to screen it from like your neighbors?
Yes, because sometimes what
that's probably
happens,
not
somebody
true.
says, I'm on the third floor of an apartment building and I'm looking down at this. Well, you never get screened at that. So and that ends up at the zoning board becoming a huge battle between neighbors. And the suggestion was, you really want to screen it from the street view.
Yeah, that part makes sense. And also, like, is it from the street view or from your neighbors, or is
Well,
it
it says, or
banned?
from surrounding properties at grade.
Well, but that's kind of
Makes
like,
it seem
does
like it's
everybody
one or the
cover
other.
their air conditioners then?
Pardon me?
Does everyone screen their air conditioners?
Not
Like,
complete-
my
not-
air conditioner and my neighbors are 10 feet away from each other. I
Exactly,
mean,
and
are
you
we
can
supposed
see
to-
them from the side.
Are we supposed to screen them in front of each other so they don't offend each other?
Let me tell you, as you know, where I live in the summer, and I got a phone call that somebody said, it was the former planning board, and they needed to speak to me about a serious issue. And I said, well, I'm at a cafe, it's like 11 o'clock at night, what are you talking about?
Right.
And I said, look, let me get to my apartment, and so this is when I was, in Paris, and I get back to my apartment, and I return the phone call, and the zoning emergency was that some people were before the zoning board, and they had too small a lot, so when they wanted to redo their air conditioner, they couldn't comply to code. And I think it had like a 5-foot setback, and I said, so make it 3 feet, done. And then they said, well, what about screening? And I said, well, you could always require some screening around it. And that's what happened, and I went back to the cafe and forgot about the issue. And then I found out that they adopted such an ordinance, but made it a lot more elaborate screening than I ever imagined. I thought a couple of bushes would have done it. They were talking about walls and everything else, and that was going on. And the end result was something a lot uglier than
Yeah.
just looking at an air conditioning unit.
Okay.
So that
so-
was the genesis of it all.
Yeah, but what are we doing here? I get it.
So leave it at from view of street, of a public street, and
Yeah,
leave it at that?
Yeah,
that's what I
Yeah.
would do.
yeah.
Okay.
Good catch, Ryan.
Just from public view from the street,
Yeah. I think that's the only issue people really have.
okay? Because you're right, John. Most people have ones abutting or facing each other, adjoining lots.
All right,
Okay.
number 5.
Number 5 just simply makes sense because
Yes.
you want it
We love
in the
that.
DRO, so if you don't comply, it's a variance rather than a waiver request. Rooftop amenities, this has been an issue in many municipalities, whether you want some allowance for, do you want outdoor dining on a rooftop? Do you want just passive recreation on a rooftop?
I mean, if you were to amend and allow more than 20 seats, what kind of methodology around figuring out what's the appropriate number?
When you said 20 feet,
20
20
seats.
seats, you said, oh,
Seats.
okay. There is no magic number.
But like, can you put requirements in, like it needs to comply with all?
There's a
Any other
ratio
requirement?
relative to the
Yeah,
egress,
yeah,
probably
I mean,
from a fire code
something,
perspective.
right?
It's
Like,
a
you
fire
wouldn't-
code
You wouldn't
maximum.
want someone putting, overcrowding a roof or wherever you're gonna put these.
Well, that's why we selected 20 seats, because we looked at some of the other projects that have been approved this way. It should also say, no, and I just realized it this second, it might also say that, no live entertainment, because that could get noisy, obviously, and have that as a restriction or a
I'm
prohibition.
indifferent if it's 20, 40, 60, 80, just some sense of how you would calculate the right number.
Maybe occupancy by square foot,
Yeah, I think that's more
more like
because-
that than seats?
Don't we
because-
do that for permits for outdoor park, like for Winberries right now? They come to the city for an application, we approve X number of seats based on X number of square footage. Wouldn't this be something similar?
And is it right now, is it capped
Where
at
you're not
20?
seating, you're just-
Right, I don't know, but I know
I don't
when we
know.
see those applications, when they want to put a sidewalk tables in, there's some sort of methodology.
So
Okay, no, we have that formula, so we could do that as an option. What we were trying to
Yeah,
limit
I think you're right.
was the sense
Right.
of too much noise
Mhm, mhm.
up there, and we
Right.
picked a number.
Do we have an application from the Albion for the rooftop?
don't
I heard
know.
there's talk of a rooftop space at the hotel.
They're working on submitting it. We should be getting it soon.
Because that could be the largest space around. I don't know how big a space they have.
Might be a good test case to figure out.
Yeah, maybe we
So
put
we
it.
can
Yeah.
put it on
Yeah.
hold
Yeah.
until we see that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we should do that.
Does that sound good?
Well, actually,
Or not.
or do you
Or
want to have
put
something in
something in
place?
place,
Because then you're,
Yeah.
then you're,
Yeah.
then you're
Fair too.
retroactively trying to catch up.
You're not gonna get it done in time.
You're not gonna get it done in
probably,
time.
anyway, if it's in motion.
All right.
And anyways, the fullest kind of discussion on this is not just occupancy, it's also lighting, sound
Sound and all
equipment.
that,
I
yeah.
mean,
Right.
we can you have umbrellas up there. I mean, these were zoning board applications, 127, Summit Ave, across from BMS, and then 40 Beechwood, you're just here in the downtown core.
Yeah,
Where there's just no
conditions
consistent guidance available
Right.
around the time with which you can have lighting, grills, you know, you name it, right? There's a lot of different components. And we'll certainly go in the Albion conversation.
So are we going to hold on this?
But not necessarily
Steve, you know, he saw these applications, so
Yeah.
do you have any
What do you think, Steve?
suggestions on what we should try and include, or?
what components we should include?
Or if we should address it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the principal issue is the occupancy, right? How to potentially limit the occupancy. And then from that, things that we consistently ran into, especially where there's a residential component to the building. If it was a purely commercial building, its use was different. So some of the residential applications, light was a consideration, sound was a consideration, cooking equipment was a consideration. At the Morris Avenue site, there's a dog run on that rooftop, which I think is an atypical amenity, but we could potentially consider that. But that's a key differentiator as well that determines also some of the operational consideration, like hours of use. You wouldn't expect a purely commercial building to necessarily have weekend hours of operations or lengthy nighttime access. So those are some of the things that I recall seeing,
Okay.
that there just wasn't a consistent set of guidance available to apply, and we were kind of
Yeah.
Right.
making it up on the fly.
Why don't we
saw
put
only
together
one at planning
some,
board that I remember that was the Elks.
Yeah.
And there were, you know, you want to encourage residential on upper floors in downtowns. It's, you know, generally thought of as a good thing. But there are, you know, residents right next to it. So to your point, you know, light and sound. And so I think because it was a variance, we could say, you know, lights out at 11 or whatever it was, so that people could have a comfortable lifestyle next door.
Joe, is there any comparison we can draw from other municipalities on how they've dealt with it?
yes, we've done it in Jersey City and Hackensack, I believe. So let me check that.
Hoboken too, you have anything over there?
Pardon me?
Hoboken as well, I would think would probably have some of that.
There are some in Hoboken as well. You check
Definitely
that. We used to
Hoboken,
be
yeah.
their planners, so.
Yeah.
Check.
So we're going to hold on this?
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. The next item is parking. You do not require parking in the central business district. And then somebody was suggesting if you're over a certain level of intensity, you should start requiring some parking. So we deleted the section that says no parking is required, and then added that where you're above a ratio of 225%, then RSIS would kick in. Yes.
I think we're talking about two things totally separate, and one is loading and one is parking. So when I look at this, I think, well, are we gonna require, because when you look at sort of the initial scratched out one, it mentions no off-street parking or loading spaces shall be required for buildings located.
That's your current ordinance.
Right. So I guess my question is, we're not changing anything with the loading, correct?
Correct.
So they don't require any loading.
They never have.
So,
Just downtown. But yeah.
right, I mean, so to give you an example, right, on Maple Street every day, there's two massive trucks who are blocking the street every day. So I think we should, when we're doing this, we should think about that in addition to. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think we should be thinking about that. Does that make any sense?
There are standards identifying the number of loading spaces in relation to the number of units. So we could certainly add that here.
Well, this is for an extra large project.
Yes,
If somebody wants to build something extra large, they don't get that exemption.
correct.
They have to start complying with some parking, with whatever
Right.
the RSIS.
Oftentimes, it's anywhere from 20 to 40 or so units. Anything above that, you require loading, on-site loading.
Right, all right, so that would cause,
So is this, Joe, written such that any development over the 225% threshold for FAR would be required to provide parking for the full potential?
No,
Or
for
everything
that,
above the
for that
225
overage, above,
the threshold?
yeah.
No, right.
It's like a safety net, it sounds like.
Yeah,
for-
it could be
for
perceived as
Overdevelopment, so that we
underparking.
don't have
Yeah.
consequences in our parking, public parking in the street.
Interesting. Something more than exists today.
Yeah, and
It sounds reasonable to me.
It sounds reasonable to me, too.
Me too.
All right.
Unless
Okay, we'll put
anyone
that one in.
objects, we'll put that on the recommended to the council list.
okay, there, item on page 4, 35-9.91, there had been discussion about deleting or repealing the section about lifts and vehicle stacking.
This is a differentiation between having that kind of equipment versus actual having grounded actual spots, right? Is that the differentiation we're talking about here, between the reserve versus
No, you know,
the lifts, or is there a different?
wherever there's those lifts where you have, you know, one at-grade parking spaces, and then with the lift, there's spaces above that.
Right.
And I don't know where this came from to delete it, but that was the suggestion, maybe Jennifer.
Are
you
there
know?
any in the city?
Yeah.
There's at least
Yes.
two, 125, 127 Summit Avenue, that burned down building that was
Right.
reconstructed. There's a mechanical, kind of remote operated stack parking. And then the to-be constructed Turconnell Park was approved with stack parking as well.
Yeah. What it does is add to the allowable density. Because obviously, you have to get a certain number of parking in certain zones.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking, what if, I mean, look, we know we're short on housing, right? If there was a apartment building that was gonna be built, but in order to meet parking, they needed to use a hydraulic lift system, why would we prevent that from being allowed?
I do think, though, when some of the zoning was done, they looked at the parking as a governor somewhat. Like, well, they
Yeah.
can't park it, so they certainly can't go up, you know, so, or they certainly can't have that many. I think it was looked in part and parcel together, not anticipating stack parking.
No, but
So
what you're,
just, I brought it up for discussion, because I'm curious. I think the project on Summit Ave is great, you know, and I don't think it affects the community, the character, anything, and it worked out. So I'd really like to get input, because it's kind of a new thing, and I don't know what the impacts could be.
well, let me suggest this, because I like what Paul had said, because we're going to be dealing with the affordable housing issue, and if you find that, you know, the projects are attractive anyway, you get a few more units, and even if you don't zone certain sites for affordable housing, if someone comes in and proposes that site for a multifamily, we will have a mandatory set-aside ordinance built into the fourth round plan. You already have it in the third round plan. That would require them to provide a set-aside, so you'll get a couple of affordable units out of it. You would never get that if you only allow at-grade parking. So there might be some merit to consider this.
Got it.
Is, a question I have also, is there, even if it's not stated, is this sort of a workaround from a cubic footage perspective, so that you maybe didn't have to add another story? Because no one wants to go down, it's expensive.
True,
right?
and
So if
they'd
you're
never
gonna
do it,
build up,
yeah.
You know, to fit the same amount of cars without those lifts, you arguably probably have to add another level in, which would start to raise the height of the building even more than if you had a lift.
That's right, so we're going to be asked to make a variance for height.
Right.
Would we rather just make the allowed allotment for for this type of parking?
Maybe,
Right,
maybe.
maybe, so we have the option of not.
And then in our subcommittee discussion, you know, we were talking about maintenance, and, you know, this is a relatively new thing. What happens, you know, it's just truly up for discussion, because it's relatively new.
I mean, the maintenance issue was discussed extensively for the Turconnell Park application. We had input from the fire department around fire safety. We conditioned, in that case, it's actually, if anyone interested in moving over there, when it gets built, it's going to be a valet-run operation. So there's some consideration on self-service versus operated by professionals. what were to be happening in periods of extended power outages, for example, providing access to cars, handicap accessibility. And it was the finding of the zoning board that we were able to address all of those considerations through a variety of different avenues. So that could be evidence that we've reached sufficient maturity with the technology, that it is in fact, a reasonable inclusion in multifamily development these days. Summit just doesn't have a tremendous
leave
amount of
it in.
experience with it. You'd have to look beyond Summit's borders.
Yeah. So leave it in.
So leave it in.
I would leave it.
Okay. Good.
Okay, parking for daycare.
Yeah.
The standard you have, we've talked about this in the past. It's not a good standard. It doesn't nearly reflect what the parking generation is. I forget if there was a daycare application. I just forget if it was before
Primrose.
this board or the,
There was Primrose here, and then there
Primrose.
was Learning Center for zoning.
okay. And the parking lot design for one, I think it was Primrose, was terrible because it just
Yeah.
didn't work.
Yeah, Primrose was pretty contentious.
Yeah, it was. And so, when we compared it to what was required for parking if it was a school, you know, because on their website and everything, they're a school, but for zoning purposes, they wanted to be a daycare because the parking was so much less, the parking requirement was so much less. So, 3 parking spaces per staff member at peak shift is all that it says, and I don't know if that's sufficient. You know, should it be
Isn't that less than?
an
No,
additional for number of students?
for some, that's a type,
classrooms?
first it should be 4. It's 4 spaces, not 3. I meant to point that out. But,
Because if it's an operator who has larger classes per employee, you know, then you're still dealing with a lot of parents coming and going, dropping off their kids. And if you don't have sufficient parking, it could be a dangerous situation.
And these would be
Yeah.
New Jersey, New York size parking spaces, not Texas size parking spaces.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So I looked at the,
I believe, let me double check this. I
Yeah.
believe
Okay.
this came from ITE, their parking manual, but I will double check that.
well, in our
But
DR now.
this
that-
needs to be changed.
The
This,
educational institutions is 2.5 per classroom for nursery, 2.5 spaces, and 2 per classroom for grades K through 10, and 3.5 for high school, basically. So, I don't know.
So, well, we could make a reasonable number. I mean, council, this is a recommendation. Council will decide what it wants to do. Well, we
That's
definitely,
right.
but we
And
definitely want to do
I think we
more.
should write it and then let
Let
them.
me double check the
decide.
ITE handbook.
Okay. But that's going to be a yes. We're going to make we're going to make a recommendation.
You're just gonna do it better, or leave that number or make it better.
Okay.
Thank you.
4 or more. 4 or more.
Okay. The EV parking, your standard was actually adopted prior to the state adopting their standard. So, you know, we would suggest that you amend your ordinance accordingly, because that's the state law.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we're just going, this is to make us come in compliance with state law?
Yes.
Consistency? All right, so
Okay.
that's a yes.
Okay, good.
And we did receive extensive comment from the Environmental Commission on solar and EV. And I don't know, Jeff, you or Tom saw that. We can kind of pass it through. I think this is at least a step towards compliance with the kind of universal standard in the state. And there's more we could potentially do. They cited some specific instances, especially around EV charging, around some concern of what is permitted even at residential locations in terms of the actual EV equipment being accessible and where it's located, how setbacks work. I mean, there's a lot of discussion, I suspect, that you see in other municipalities.
Yeah, there's a lot of concern about a fire in a parking garage in
Right.
particular.
Right.
It takes forever to put these things out.
But, yeah, I think, at least my perspective is bringing us into conformance with the state standard is a positive step forward, But this does likely merit a separate discussion around if we want to, as a community, adopt any different standards, be it with respect to safety, or I think what the Environmental Commission was attempting to express was to encourage easier access, more readiness of these residential properties, be it new construction or renovation, to be ready to accept EV, which today is not by any means the universal expectation. So I would just offer that for
But-
anybody EC
Well, and then
listening out
isn't
there.
there, I mean, doesn't the governor theoretically want us to be electric by 2035? Is that,
That's right.
Something like that, or 2030
I think we
maybe.
should at least have something in place by then.
Right.
It's going to coincide with the end of the third round of affordable
Yeah.
housing. So
No, that's just gonna be the month of March.
It's all going to come together right then and there.
Yeah. Not to punt it too far out, but maybe in the master
Yeah.
plan, the proper master plan work to be done, we revisit environmental considerations, solar and EV, and look at kind of where we sit there with regard to the technology, the state standards, and address it more holistically. This at least is a nice incremental step to conformity around the state regulation.
Okay. Accessory dwelling units.
Do we want to skip this one? This is complicated.
We had this conversation once before,
Yeah.
so it's a continuation of that.
Policy discussion.
This one's a bigger topic. Interesting topic.
This is a topic that could take some time.
And we may have to be reactionary to what the governor,
Right.
to
So
what
I-
the state comes through with.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, so I think you may want to hold off on this.
Yep,
It's got to stay a topic of conversation.
yeah.
Okay. You're,
This was another one that, actually, this was one that an
Say it in
architect-
French, say it in French.
Ricochet, come on.
This was brought actually from an architect that uses our DRO all the time, and, you know, there have been some newer homes that wanted a porte cochere. I don't think it's a big issue, and it's very uncommon, but it also, you know, when it comes up, we'd have something, so I'm open to it either way. What do you all think? Apparently
I agree.
carports per se are not allowed,
Yeah.
but a porte cochere is a more
More elegant.
elaborate, matches the design
I
of
was
the
gonna say,
building.
what's the difference between the two?
Yeah.
I'm from Allentown, Pennsylvania, we don't have any porta cocheres, but.
Well, I think it actually, it's supposed to be a pass for your coach.
It's like what you have it like when you go to a hotel, right?
Right.
And you pull up, it's covered,
Yeah.
you drive in and out.
Well, there's
Exactly.
a house that built one, on the, I'm trying to remember where it is, on the north side?
On Springfield, right? Or
There's
on-
one
The
on
new one that's
Hoover.
going up, I would have to imagine.
No, it's over on
that-
Essex, or, it's,
One on Hobart.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, the only way that I think that you could differentiate it, because it's really the same thing, in a lot of ways, except that I think by definition, people park under the carport versus porte cochere, you're just supposed to drive through and have parking elsewhere. Is that,
I personally think this is a conversation where if we
We
don't
don't
have
need it.
pictures and stuff, like, I
yeah,
don't have the
I think
bandwidth.
we should just,
I'm not saying I'm against it, I
no,
just,
but
I need to see like pictures and what's the difference between a porte cochere and a carport and why we didn't have carports to begin with, and I think it's just like,
I know, that was there
Yeah.
forever, and I
I'm not against it,
wasn't
I'm
gonna
just
touch
saying,
it.
I think we should come back with some pictures and additional
Yeah.
information.
Okay, that we can do.
Okay.
Or just, it comes up so infrequently, it's like the double dormer thing.
Yeah.
We could just,
I do think with people who have garages out back, right, they're limited by, I mean, I had one. And
Yeah.
I know it was a pain because my kids are always in the rain, so I can certainly appreciate, I think that's what that means.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not against it, I think it
All
makes
right,
sense.
so I'll just say this, so basically the difference would be, if you wrote it something like, a roof structure attached to the principal building designed in the same style and with the same, materials as the principal structure, then that's kind of what it is. Like, you know, you see a shingle style house that has a shingle, you know, with the big stone piers, you know, like it basically looks like it belongs to the house, that it's not a separate thing.
If you want to prevent it from being a parking site, then you say that it can only be built in a house that already has a garage.
Yeah,
Because otherwise,
Doesn't mind
then it becomes the parking spot.
Some people use that
Yeah.
parking garage.
I understand.
I'm leaning towards Julia, for sure.
Okay, look at pictures.
Let it go.
Finally, canopy, roofs, and pergolas.
Yeah.
you know, we put this in this memo, but then when we looked at your definition after the fact of building coverage, I think it's covered already. So I don't know that we need.
It does say there have been some very large pergolas proposed in Summit, indicating that some controls for pergolas, coverage height, setbacks are appropriate. And if that's the case, then would you want to use your accessory structure language to add it there again? Like, it used to be 15-foot height, it used to be, I mean, and then you have we have the 24-foot, no longer than 24-foot long and no more than 576 square feet. Do you want to just have some parameters? That's your recommendation.
That we could do
use
also.
something we already have.
Okay, that we could do. I mean, in large measure, I think building coverage definition handles that, but we could add that.
So this stuff is not earth-shattering.
Okay.
I think where we ended up with. Just some
Okay,
edits.
that was
Painful.
that's a good list.
Okay. So Joe has a few tweaks, and then we can read it over, approve it, and send it up to the city
Yeah.
council.
It might be less than 6 weeks now.
Last item on the agenda is, actually, any comments on the minutes from last time?
Oh, I was there July 22nd.
Oh,
Yeah, the minutes just say at the end that I didn't vote on it because I wasn't there, and I didn't want to argue it. I was like, oh, I was there, but that's okay. Members excused, but I was actually there. Sorry.
Did anyone have any other thoughts on the minutes?
You weren't there. Yeah, you weren't there.
And if not, I'll take a motion to approve. Anyone?
What was that?
Motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
oh wait, I'm sorry, we're excluding Mr. Stern and Mr. Spur, so you can't motion.
No way.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr.
You
Philman.
weren't there. It's
Any
just
seconds?
reference that you couldn't vote on the prior.
Thank you, Mr. Formicelli.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries.
I think we've done it all. Good job, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.